Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome on behalf of the Royal Meteorological Society and the Royal Institute of Navigation to this half-day webinar on weather and sailing. RYN, together with the Royal Met Society, jointly organise these events on a biennial basis, and this time it's RYN's turn to chair the event. And we have been pleased to be supported again by the RYA in this event. I'm Paul Bryans, Chair of the Small Craft Group Committee of the Royal Institute of Navigation, and I'm your host today. And my chief task is to ensure that the speakers stick to their time slots. Today, as most of you will know, we should have been holding our Weather and Sailing Conference at the RNLI headquarters in Poole. Unfortunately, we had to take the decision a few months ago to do this as a webinar and to push the event a year forward to the 1st of October 2022. I hope most of the people today will be able to join us in that. Well, as we've got over 100, I doubt you'll all turn up next year, but I hope a lot of you will be able to attend. And I hope that in the meantime, this free half-day event will make up for the disappointment of, in my case anyway, 5 hours of driving in the cold and rain, possibly, although it's not raining at the moment. The programme this afternoon covers different aspects of how weather affects sailing and how weather information can be used and made available to the sailor. Teaching, obviously, is part and parcel of that, and that will be covered in the first talk. Professional tailored forecasting and weather routing for sailors will be covered later, and then we have 2 talks from racing sailors as to how they obtain the information when they're at sea and how they use it. Our first speaker today is Craig Burton, who is the Training Resources Manager of the RYA, and he will be talking about the challenges of teaching the recreational sailor about the weather. Craig has spent most of his life working in the marine sector and as a practitioner covering sailing dinghies to square riggers and ribs to large yachts. He has been with the RYA for some 10 years, starting as chief instructor for the Yachtmaster and shore-based schemes before taking on a new role as Training Resources Manager, covering the publications and e-learning teams. He intends to ensure that the RYA training remains relevant, accessible, and affordable for many years to come. So a little bit ahead of time, can I ask Craig to do his talk? And I hope, Craig, that you managed to share your screen.
Hello all. Yeah, I've had some technical itches already today. My internet kept dropping off this morning, so I've restarted everything to hope that doesn't happen again. But fingers crossed, and in the good old British spirit, let's just soldier on. I'm going to share my screen to begin with, and we'll dip in and out some bits and pieces. Okay, so hopefully you can all see my screen now, and I am going to talk about the challenges we've faced in teaching the sailor about the weather. What this is not going to be about is really about the weather. It's about the challenges of teaching. It's what's changed a great deal in the many years that the RYA schemes have been around, but more noticeably in the last 10 years. So put into a bit of a context here, we have 7 different practical disciplines for which we have a training scheme. And they're supported by shore-based courses and have done since the sort of first creation of the scheme, and over 100 publications. And this has worked exceptionally well, whereby people understand the knowledge, some of the underpinning skills that are required, and then put it to practice in a boat. And that's really what makes our scheme so popular and so successful, is it's very much hands-on, as other schemes are at Glennon's that I know Tom has been involved in. And in the recent years, we've moved our publications into ebooks, because that's a growing market where more people don't want to lug books around. They want to have the whole 100 of their books in one device. And we're also moving into e-learning. 10 years ago, we did our first e-learning course, so they're more accessible. And the next step is going into audiobooks. Last year was our 50th anniversary of the creation of the scheme, and we had some big plans. But for various reasons, last year didn't go to plan. So it was a bit of a damp squib. So, see if I can get this to work. Who remembers this?
Another shipping forecast issued by the Met Office at 2343 on Saturday the 18th. There are warnings of gales in all areas except Trafalgar. The general synopsis at 1800.
Okay, so just out of interest, just in the comments there, how many people remember that and have got up in the early hours of the morning or stayed up late at night to get the shipping forecast and the coast station reports? Let's just see how many people recall that and do that. Nope. Nobody. Yes, Paul Bryan's, yeah. Definitely remember it. Yes, so there's a lot on this call, recall this. And I have some fond memories going up the Irish Sea with a beautiful swell behind on an old gaffer, and it was one of the best sailing moments I'd ever had. So it sticks with me. But shall we say it's a little bit old-fashioned now. But having said that, back in the 1980s, this is an extract from the Day Skipper Shore Base Pack, and you can see there's a lot of dedication, a lot of time dedicated, to that particular forecast. And the quote at the top of the page is, the commonest source of weather information is the BBC shipping forecast. And when we used to test people on what times of day these were, that was often a test question. What times are the shipping forecasts and what frequency are they on? And we went into great detail in the book and in the shore base course to get used to the format so that people could write it down, because it was quite quick. Even though the speaker on the radio was speaking quite slowly, there was a lot to write down. So it had a set format, set words, and then we had to then struggle to write that into a synoptic chart so we could look at what the trends are likely to be in the coming future. Now, of course, that's not something that we particularly have to do today. So let's have a look what the real world version is now. Bear with me. So hopefully you can see a synoptic chart now. So this, as I'm sure you're all aware, is the Met Office page where you can get a forecast and very easily, very quickly go through the progression for the next 2 to 3 days. So the need to dedicate so much to a radio broadcast and the terminology within there is somewhat diminished. And in terms of the coast station information, well, that equally is a piece of cake. That here's the Met Officer's reporting points, and you can very easily get everything you want to know of these. So if I wanted to know what it was like, if I was going to cross the Dover, I can see Sandetty, exactly what the wave height is, the wave period, the wind speed, everything. So the information available to us now is huge. So our course has now changed quite a bit. So in here, this is the weather booklet that supports the Day Skipper, the Yachtmaster scheme, and we've replicated shipping forecast areas, and have data buoys reports for barometric pressure, wind direction and speed, wave height and wave direction, so that people are introduced to this. This is where you can get useful information. We also keep the shipping forecast because that still has a purpose, a very big purpose in the world, as one of our predecessors, James Stevens, often says, that the inquiry will be looking at the shipping forecast, and that's still true today. That's the one that it's the official forecast for seafarers, and that's the one that the inquiry will look at. Inshore waters forecast, barometric charts, and also the more modern, often nicknamed postcode forecast, where you can get a forecast for a specific location, giving you sometimes an hourly breakdown of what the wind is. And we're in the course now. Our focus is on understanding what is the best forecast for you or for whatever you're going to do. So is the shipping forecast, the inshore waters forecast, is a synoptic chart, depending on your passage. And an analogy we use internally is learning to be a skipper is not that different from learning to drive a car, in as much as the learner driver will be looking at the bonnet of the car. So the day skipper is looking at a day. They get a daily forecast. Coastal skippers are looking a bit further down the road, so they're likely to be looking a little bit more down the road as a coastal skipper, looking at synoptic charts and getting a bit more of a feel for a couple of days down the line. The offshore and into ocean, they're really looking forward, right up ahead for where the sharp bends are and what's coming down the tracks. And that's where grid files and more expertise of forecasting and routing for longer passages comes into play. So that's where the course has changed. Now, another thing, just to show you how we represent that in our ebooks, we now represent the range of forecasts that are available. And we've also tried to enhance the way we present that. You'd noticed in the previous extract, there was a very lot of text. So what we look to do in our books now is try to make the most, those are all our ebooks, by the way, make the most of the technology. So the classic life cycle of depression of how it forms, we can actually now in the ebooks, he says, do that again. The picture paints 1,000 words, as they say, and this is not necessarily something that we would test somebody on knowing how they form, but we can represent it graphically, which will aid people to understand how it works. And we can also, if I go to another page, just to give you an example of where we can direct people to, he says again. So this is just an extract from one of the very many very graphical interfaces of forecasting, and that's just to, excuse me, that is just to illustrate the squeeze between highs and lows. So it all helps people understand, and that's certainly a way of modern learning. Is it's much more visual, there's much more interaction, and this is certainly the way we're going with our training. There's a few questions coming in, so I'll just have a look and see if there's any of those that I can answer now. So yeah, you buy the paperback, you get the paperback. You do get a discount on the print book, which is one of the questions we've been asked. And we also provide the e-packs within training courses as well. Okay. So what's the problem? What's the problem? All this information is out there. So what are we worried about? Well, the difficulty is that it's the perceived relevance of what we do in the training scheme now. It is so easy to get information on the web. You can find almost anything on there. And what we see as a big challenge is that because it's so easy to find it, then the general public tend not to know what they don't know and don't see there's a need to learn something. And that's quite a concern. Now, what really brought this to our attention happened just less than 10 years ago. And it was in January 2012, where a yacht was being moved from Southampton to the Thames for the Southampton Boat Show as it happened. And at the time that it left the Solent, the forecast in place, the shipping forecast was west to southwest, force 5 to 7, increasing gale 8 to storm 10 later. Moderate or rough, occasionally very rough or high. Before they got to Ramsgate, the wind had increased actually to 11, according to the RYA vessel that came to rescue them at the time. And they had to call for assistance after a very large wave came over their stern, knocked the helmsman to the floor, bent the wheel, and then they were in that situation which none of us ever want to be in, where the elements are too much for you and the boat to deal with. Everybody was okay. No, the vessel didn't sink. Nobody was lost. But in the the subsequent investigation and also prosecution, a few things came to light that made us really pay attention. It wasn't that they weren't using forecasts, but they'd misunderstood it. They hadn't really appreciated what they were looking at. So they had a synoptic chart, and they were looking at the synoptic chart, not necessarily the best forecast to be using. And that was one thing we identified, is that historically, when we taught meteorology, we were almost convincing people they were as good as meteorologists that did the forecast, or they were as good as the UKHO because they could work it all out themselves. Whereas actually get a forecast and then interpret that within surroundings around you is what we're talking about now. Another error was, although the skipper had gone back a few times to download another synoptic chart to see if anything had changed, he didn't realize that it was downloading the same one. So the first analysis chart and then the forecast charts, he just kept using the same ones. So he wasn't fully appraised to what the situation had changed over the days leading up to the passage. And perhaps the most contributory factor was the over-reliance on a interface such as this, using a website, using the GFS forecast, and it was giving him an hourly forecast for Dover, which is what he was using as a bailout option. And he'd got sucked into the perceived accuracy of hourly forecasts and believed that his ETA at Dover was going to be a couple of hours before it became force 10, so he'll be okay. Dover actually closed well before he got there, and they didn't get there at all. So those two factors really brought home that we need to be addressing this to make sure people are aware of what it is they're looking at, because it is quite difficult to understand what's behind a lot of the things that are online, be it an app or a website, and it's very easy to get sucked into the perceived accuracy. So what we're wanting to do now is in our theory courses is to demonstrate this nugget of information, is that how can they be so accurate to an hour when the Met Office can't? It's like, well, perhaps they're not. Looking at the resolutions used for the GFS scale, that's a large area. So when they're giving detailed forecasts in these apps for Portsmouth, is going to be slightly different to Hayling Island, slightly different to Southampton, or slightly different to Cowes. We've got to question how they can be so confident about that. On the right-hand side, there's a Met Office resolution, which just demonstrates that they do actually have a better computer than a lot of other people for the UK waters. Having said that, humans learn by experience, and most of the time what these apps say are absolutely perfectly fine and accurate. So that's another error that gets introduced to the equation. The official phrase is complacency, which sounds quite negative, but basically that's the human normal reaction of nothing bad's happened, so I'm just going to continue doing what I've always done because it's safe. And most times that is a reasonable assumption, but not always. So I want to introduce you into a concept of what drives our training, particularly as after we moved online. and it's a thing called action mapping. So this moves away from the notion of memorizing lots of facts. I mean, I have nightmares, almost literally, about my general operator's radio certificate, where I had to memorize all sorts of facts and figures for the exam, one of which was the frequency of channel 16. And to this day, I don't know why I would need to memorize the frequency of channel 16, because I have a red button that says 16 to press when I want it. But that's the sort of thing we want to move away from. So just a question to see what our views are. And that's, what's going to be most important for these two guys in this picture to do? Put the fire out or accurately describe the fire triangle? I'm hoping everybody on the call is assuming the first one is the right answer. So our training is more geared now around what behaviors do we want from the people. So in this weather forecast scenario, they appreciate the significance of the forecast for the trip they're going to do. Going back to the day skipper, inshore waters is going to be your best bet in most cases. Even backed up with an app-based one. I mean, if they marry up with each other, then that's fine. If they disagree, then err on the side of caution with the inshore waters forecast. How useful is a grid file? How useful is Synoptic Chart? And then when they have enough knowledge to interpret the Synoptic Chart, that gives them a greater understanding of what's happening around them. Watching the trends of air pressure, what the cloud cover is doing, etc., to mesh together this forecast, which has got a 24-hour scale to it, to what's actually happening to you now. So they can predict when the weather's arriving faster than anticipated or slower than anticipated, or indeed if it's completely deviating from the forecast, which so we all have from time to time where the forecast changes significantly from one forecast to the next because there's a lot of uncertainty. And there's a great quote from a Met Office person we were working with that basically went along the lines of, if I've got a pan of water and I know the temperature of that water and I know the room temperature and I know the amount of energy that the flame under it can put into that pan, I can very accurately predict when that water will boil. But what I can't say is where the bubbles will appear. And I think that's a great analogy for forecasting, is they are very accurate, but there are times when you know something's going to happen, but you can't be very precise about where it will happen. And I think that's something that it's useful for all people to keep into their mind, that as brilliant as modern forecasting is, there's still an art to it, and it's not purely science. So sticking with action mapping, let's just have a look at this next couple of pictures. From a weather perspective, what are we asking the people to do in these two different scenarios? It's quite an abstract one. I'll see if anybody can put an answer in there. Not many answers going in there. Well, I'll put you out of the misery. Yeah, Paul Bryan's perfect, bang on it. So for the leisure sailor, this relevance that we talked about earlier on, if he was racing against his mates and he was in the one on the left, then that's unstable air. So the significance of shifts and gusts is going to give him a winning edge. So eyes out of the boat, looking for the wind. On the right is more stable air, so the shifts are going to be less significant. So eyes in the boat, get the best bit of speed out of your boat. And that's the kind of thing that we try to put into our courses, particularly practical courses, to bring people back to there is value in getting education. And in most of our courses, we only really introduce people to a subject. We get them to a certain level, and then, as many of the speakers later down in this agenda do, they go on to learn a great deal more about many of the things that we've introduced them to. In fact, Simon Rowell is a chap that we use quite a lot, who's the meteorologist for the British sailing team, and he's got a master's in oceanography and meteorology, I believe. And he uses this example. But he also talks about with the youth squads, you often catch parents using the app-based forecasts to tell their children which side of the water to be on at a particular time, because that's when the wind's going to change and that's where to be. And he tries to explain to them that that's not quite how it works, which is why he spends months and months and months getting data from the places where the sailing team are going to be racing to work out for himself what happens in certain circumstances, etc., etc. So we've got quite a hill to climb to convince people of where these things fit in. And one comment was that in the questions there, that if you drop your device over the side, it's pretty useless. Yeah, that's absolutely spot on true. But again, people tend not to think about the bad things happening to them. So summarising, what do we want them to do? We want to identify the correct forecast and get it. We want them to understand the significance of the forecast. So they still need to understand terminology to some extent. There is an element here between, do they need to memorise it, or is it okay for them to just have a reference to remind them? One of the most utilised things in the almanac is that section at the front, which tells you lots of information about weather forecasts and how to do coaster steers and coal regs and sound signals, where people can use it as a reference when they're just not quite sure they've remembered it correctly. So we have a split between what we see as things they need to know on recall and things that they need to know of so they can reference them later. They need to observe the real world, which will include things that come from the internet, from weather stations, or from radio broadcasts, maritime safety information broadcasts, or nav text, to help them mesh their forecast into the real world. They really need to do that. It's as a recent article from the chief inspector from the MAIB said, the human has to stay in control. They need to get all the information they can so that they make the right decision and avoid getting sucked into just trusting whatever the internet has told them is going to happen. And ultimately, all that leads to making some good decisions. And I think I'd be safe to say leaving the Solent with a forecast 8 to 10 in the forecast would be classed as a not good decision. Enjoy boating, of course. So Paul mentioned accessible. So we talked about relevance briefly there. I'll talk about accessible now. So there's been quite a lot of change in recent years, particularly in the sort of millennial age bracket. And there's been some research called the Futures, or the Futures Project, by a lady called Liz Russell, who runs Russell Marketing. And she did this with British Marine and with the RYA. And it's demonstrating the changes in behaviours. And there's things like they're less willing, people in general, in the younger generations, are less inclined to commit to large purchases. They're less inclined to commit to an organisation. So membership of things is less of an attraction. William Taylor asked for the prosecution. The prosecution was for on the vessel. It was there was various charges, but the main one was not operating the vessel safely, basically, by not suitably using the forecast and passage planning. As it happened, the prosecution didn't get a conviction. Yeah, so the Futures Project, less likely to make a big investment, big purchase. And one of the really interesting things is that they're not worried about spending money, but they want to do lots of different things. So they will pay somebody to make something happen. So if they want to go sailing, they will pay somebody to make it happen. And there's a couple of different drivers, but often one of the drivers is to get it on social media, to present their image to the world. I've been yachting. Here's my picture of me going yachting. And next week it might be I've gone skydiving. Here's my picture of me skydiving. It's not to say they won't commit to things they like, but they like to do lots of different things, and they don't particularly want to put a lot of effort in up front before they know they like it. Now, social media is quite an interesting thing. So there's some reports over the last sort of 3 or 4 years. What I've got here comes out of a report in 2017 from Ofcom, and one in 2020, which is about the social media dynamics and how that industry works. So some interesting statistics. So half of adults back in 2017 only use social media for news and information. And in recent years, the whole fake news and people being banned from social media for spreading misinformation, and also that social media tends to reflect back to you what you believe to be true, means it's not necessarily a good place to get facts, but there's a lot of people only use that to get information and news. A quarter of consumers purchase due to online influencers. Actually, I've missed an hour. They're influencers, that should be. So the influencer, for anyone that doesn't necessarily know what they are people that have got social channels through be it YouTube, TikTok, Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, and they have followers in vast numbers, millions in cases, and they often promote things as part of a business transaction. So they will promote a product because they've been asked to and they receive payment for that. And in the sort of 20-year-old bracket, lots and lots of people buy through social media and make choices based on an influencer that they relate to and they trust, and that's the words used in the report, that trust is built up over the years or over the months perhaps, because the influencer says things the person likes and believes to be true, and they end up then trusting them to such an extent. A quarter of people that follow influencers are more likely to trust the opinion of the influencer than a friend, which is quite interesting. So we're talking about accessibility in the start of this, and what that means for the RYA is varied. There is the accessibility of people that perhaps have some sort of limit, such as they have difficulty with seeing, they have difficulty hearing. And in terms of the shore-based schemes, one of the moves that drove us to ebooks is the fact that in that format, we're able to take advantage of all the accessibility features of major operating systems. All modern operating systems, be it computer or app-based, will enable people to get text read to them. They'll be able to change the colors and the fonts and all these different things to enable them to get over whatever their particular special requirement is. The other part of accessibility is they need to be able to actually get to it. And one of the things that we are very much struggling with at the moment is that where the people are looking for information is not necessarily where we are. So in the next 10 years or so, if we haven't increased our social media profile, we're going to become harder and harder to people to see us. And I say we, I mean all of us. So let me have a look at some examples here. So I used YouTube as a benchmark because that's an established channel, very established channel, which people of my age, and I dare to say our age, without knowing the full age of everybody on here, but just looking at the size of the subscribers. Now, just put into context, the RYA's got over 100,000 members. About 250,000 people do a formal RYA course in a normal year, so it's 250,000 people. But we've got 43,000 subscribers to our YouTube channel, so we're not engaging the people that are our members or necessarily doing the courses. So we've got a long way to go, and you can see the numbers there for the Royal Met Society. The Met Office have got a reasonably strong 135,000. Weather Channel and the US channel have got 500,000 subscribers, partly because of the size of the population, I should imagine. But a target, something for us to look to, something for us to look at, is how many good people, for want of a better phrase, that social media get. So cocoa melon nursery rhymes. I'm not endorsing any of these, but I was looking for things that were not going to get me in trouble because they had inappropriate content. So nursery rhymes is pretty damn safe. That's one of the highest subscribers on the whole of YouTube. 120 million people, 121 million people go to that channel on a regular basis and subscribe to get the content that they put out. Put in a sports context, Global Cycling Network got 2.8 million subscribers, and you know, there are a lot of people that got multiple million subscribers, and this is where we need to be going with our training. So our biggest challenge is, to summarize before we go into questions for people to ask, the biggest challenge we have is making sure people appreciate there is something to learn, that they know what they don't know, so that they, whether they buy a book or they go get some informal training within a sailing club, or subscribe to something like the Met Society or RIN or the RYA to get something that's been reviewed, peer reviewed, so that it's more reliable than somebody that you just don't know from Adam. So that's one focus. The other focus is to make sure we're presenting our information in a format that is accessible to those that are social media savvy. So we're going to have to break down a lot of our information into much smaller chunks. The BBC, for example, have done a really good job with something called BBC Bite-Sized, where they've broke down the whole of children education basically into little 2-minute videos. Anybody that went through the hell that was homeschooling during lockdown discovered BBC Bite-Sized, which probably saved lots of marriages over the lockdown. So that's my 30 minutes of presentation coming to a close. So I'll really go to questions. But before I do that, I just want to use a poll, which is, how many on this call have used YouTube to find something, a recipe, fix something, learn to do something? Just because I'd be very interested to know. I'll give it a few minutes. It says 100% at the moment, which might be just one person. So there's quite a few people putting answers. Okay. So that's quite interesting. Yeah, 100%. Everybody that answered had. So there you go. Over to questions.
Right. Thank you very much for that, Craig. So would people like to post their questions through chat? I should have pointed out that obviously anything you post on chat can either go to everybody or can just be admin only. You can change that with the button above the space where you type. So if you could just fire your questions in, that would be great. I have a few comments, obviously. Thank you very much for that, Craig. I can remember with, I suppose the best expression is nostalgia, sitting in offshore races with a dictation machine in my hand, recording the forecast and trying to write down at the same time, because usually the forecast was spoken too quickly for my ability to write it down in the template that I can't remember who it produced it. I think it was the Royal Met Society, wasn't it? Produced the template, or was it the RYA? I can't remember. Anyway,
I think it was the Met Society. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Wrote it down, and then tried to produce the Synoptic Chart, and with a bit of luck, it made some sense and managed to give me information that I could use. But we have moved on from that. Clearly, one of the big differences, Craig, between the apps and the shipping forecast and any other official forecast like the French or the Irish is, of course, that the shipping forecast has been prepared by a real person, a meteorologist, with skill and understanding, whereas the app is just churning out raw data and hopefully is sufficiently tweaked to know the coastline and the local effect, but may not be. So the concern I always have is that it's giving you wonderful information in great detail, but is it actually accurate? The people say, oh well, the shipping forecast is not very accurate because it covers a large area, but actually in my experience the shipping forecast is rarely far right, whereas apps can be quite a bit out. But of course you mentioned where something will happen in weather context. The other issue, of course, I tend to find is when it will happen, because in a lot of cases, they say, well, you can work out that they're saying a front is going to go through, and of course, the front may not go through at exactly the same time that has been forecast for a particular location, and that makes a big difference. In a lot of cases these days, we've got the information, but what changes is the speed at which the system is moving across the British Isles or wherever we happen to be. So let me look at some of these questions and see. Why is from Paul Chandler here, why is the forecast on Met Office and BBC apps often different? I thought they used the same information. Do you have an answer for that, Craig, or is that too technical for you?
It's probably a bit too technical for me, but I suspect it's down to that human, in that the shipping forecast is taking into account the way things will happen at sea, whereas a mile inland it will be different. I think it's as simple as that. That it is that is the bit that is so often misunderstood. As Paul suggested about the apps. If you look at routing apps, for example, there are a lot of different routing software. Sorry, not apps. Some better than others, but the big clincher is where you've got a skilled, experienced forecaster tweaking the numerical data from a grid file with either local knowledge or other forms of knowledge. So I think that's why the Met Office, well, two things. The Met Office in the UK area, so the UK forecast have a far smaller cell for their numerical models, but they are, as you'd expect, tweaking that model based on their knowledge of the topography and everything else that's in there.
Yeah, as Andrew points out, of course, the Met Office lost the BBC contract, so clearly the Met Office and the BBC app are going to be taking information from different sources. But I thought the BBC app wasn't actually taking forecast information. It was just taking the data in the way that all of the other apps take the data. So I think the answer to Paul's question is that the Met Office is giving a forecast provided by a forecaster, whereas the apps, including the BBC app, are using the raw data. But perhaps Andrew will come back and correct me if I'm wrong. Let me see, try and get another.
Would you like me to make a comment on that, Paul?
Yeah, thank you, Andrew.
Yeah, because I have actually stood next to the person in the forecast office in Exeter as they actually do the shipping forecast. And they're not people who've actually been sailing, which doesn't mean to say they're not very good meteorologists. But Meteo Group has some extremely good meteorologists. The elephant in the room, which we haven't really mentioned, is, as Craig points out, the resolution, the grid length of the UK Met Office model is much better much shorter than the American GFS model. The problem is that you can't get the UK Met Office model data unless you're extremely rich. So people might like to write to their MP about that, because that's where the problem lies. It'd be really nice to be able to have the high resolution UK Met Office grid data in our routing apps.
Yeah, thank you, Andrew. Yes, the RYN actually did do a visit to the Met Office, and we were able to go and see people there, including the forecasters, which was very good. Right. I think
David Irwin's got a question around discussing the different models within future RYA material.
Yeah.
So far we've chosen not to do that, because we're wary of giving people a false comfort that if I choose this particular model, I can rely upon it more than this other model. Whereas, as we've just heard, that a very good model that we can't get access to is the Met one, and they've all got their own strengths and weaknesses. And I think we were burnt before by trying to give the impression that our teaching can make a student or an instructor as good as the Met Office or the national forecasting organisations. It might change over time, but our preference, particularly as a national governing body, is that we need to push people to the official material, the published official material, and put the other stuff in the bracket of an additional aid and very useful getting a bigger picture. But if you're going to make a final decision, particularly a safety decision, you should be relying on the official forecast, because, as I said earlier in the presentation, that's what the inquiry will use.
Yeah. Coming back to the comment about the yacht being rescued that you showed the information for, as I remember Richard Falk saying, one of the problems in that case was that the skipper, who was an RYA sailing instructor, and I think he had students on board, and that's where he came unstuck. I think he wasn't prosecuted, or the prosecution failed, but it didn't do his professional sailing career any good. One of the complaints from Richard, I think, was that the guy had, in quotes, been shopping for the best weather forecast that he could find. He didn't like the official Met Office forecast, so he trawled the internet for something he thought was better, and then went with that, rather than erring on the safe side and taking advice from people who actually were getting paid for providing weather forecasts. So yeah. Right, another question. What have we got? Question from Kathy Claydon. All apps should say what model they are based on, so we know whether they're getting consensus across the models. I think there are basically two models that are used, the American and the European. Isn't that correct?
As far as I'm aware, that's the case. Yeah.
Maybe Andrew can.
Well, yes, perhaps I could offer a further insight. The people in Exeter and most professional meteorologists now are using a technique called ensembles, where the models are run several times. And that sort of takes account of the fact that forecasting the weather is difficult and the models won't always agree. So using a probability-based forecast is sometimes better for managing your risk than just assuming that the forecast is exactly right when the meteorologists themselves know it might go wrong. And there are products out there which are very useful for the yachtsmen, but they're not in the British domain, shall we say.
Yeah. I mean, Gary Howe is asking the question, I'm confused. Are you saying the Met Office data, very accurate, high resolution, is not easily accessible to normal folk on their laptop? And the answer to that is correct. And I mean, it's the same problem that we've got with UKHO information, that the Met Office is has to be run as a commercial organisation,
trading fund,
and as does the UKHO. And in America, it's totally different. The Americans have the attitude that the information that the American Met Office and NOAA about for charts, that information has been paid for using taxpayers' funds, and therefore it's already been paid for, so it should be issued for free. We don't have the same attitude. Therefore, as I understand it, most apps use the information that was provided free from the US model. The British Met Office model information isn't available to us.
I suppose it's probably worth saying that the really accurate section of their forecast is for UK waters only, or for the UK only. So their model is focused on being very accurate for the UK.
Yeah.
So Andy will probably know. I don't know how it compares outside of the UK, whether it's comparable to GFS then or still better. But it's not to say the information that the Met Office are publishing free, such as the shipping forecast and their sort of forecast for different locations. I would question how many recreational sailors will do a better job of interpreting the data than the Met Office before they push it out to us. So I personal view, not an RYA view, I don't think it's quite as terrible for the end user getting the forecast, but it would be good if there was better data for those crossing oceans than just the one or two models.
Yeah.
It's generally regarded by professional meteorologists that the ECMWF model is the best performing model overall. It certainly outperforms the GFS. And the good news is that ECMWF, this is the European Centre for Medium Range Weather Forecasting based at Reading, although it's going to migrate out of the UK, unfortunately. But that is going to become freely available in the next couple of years, which is quite a big step forward. Someone has pointed out in the chat that you can get the French data, the arpège and the Arome models. And the Arome model is very high resolution, but it's only a local area model. And the arpège model is also very good. So, but not all the apps will pull those in. But there are pieces of software out there which you can use, which will use the French model. So the French let us have their data, which is interesting, isn't it?
Of course, yeah.
At the moment. Yes. Yeah. We don't mention the fish.
No.
Right. Okay. Any other questions in that? Have I missed something? There's a great risk that I've missed something.
Steve Giggs says that he uses an app to plan but uses inshore forecast for a go no-go decision. Is that reasonable? My personal view is yes. We tend to trot around the world a fair bit in normal times, going to different places to sail, and we use Navionics to get a feel for the area, and we look at apps to get a feel for the weather. But then when we get to the location, we default back to the official sources to get the final actual detail, and the decisions are made based on that. So situational awareness and building a picture is one thing. Making the decisions, I think you're absolutely bang on, go to the official source. Yeah,
indeed. I tend to get the shipping forecast. I don't sit up and listen to it. I get the forecast from their website, and certainly that's the one I use for making no-go decisions. I tend to use grid files for situational awareness, for going across the channel or going over to Ireland. It's very useful for.
I'm trying to find a question from a chap who keeps pointing out his question's gone down the thing. Oh, yeah. BBC used to offer coastal as well as inshore forecasts. The Forbes seemed to stop as a pandemic began. I don't know anything about why that did stop or not. Don't know if anybody else
does Andrew know?
No, I can't shed any light on that. I'm not quite sure what the coastal forecast is or was. I don't know what they're referring to there. The Coast Guard retransmit the shipping forecast and inshore waters forecast on the VHF.
Yeah. And as somebody pointed out earlier, they may be out of date when they retransmit.
Yeah.
That's something I've noticed as well.
Yeah.
Okay. Right. Look, if there are any more questions, we can take them at a later stage. Anyway, thank you very much for that, Craig. And we'll, I think, move on. If I can find my notes. Where have I put my notes? Here. Sorry. Oh, on the floor. Right. Ladies and gentlemen, we're now just 5 minutes ahead of time. As I mentioned I should have said earlier, right at the beginning, this session is being recorded. All 4 speakers have given their permission for it to be published on the RYN's YouTube channel. So if you did miss the beginning or any other part of it, you'll be able to catch up later on the YouTube channel. So thank you very much for that, Craig. Our next speaker is Tom Dolan, who's an offshore racing skipper. Tom sent me a message earlier saying he's in the country in Ireland, some remote location, and he's had internet issues. So I hope, fingers crossed, Tom, that everything will go according to plan. You seem to be online and okay at the moment.
I am.
Tom, well, the information he's given us is that he grew up on a farm, so he's used to wind and rain. And age 9, he took to the water in a little wooden dinghy, which he and his father had renovated. He is now based in Brittany and is Ireland's leading solo offshore sailor, having achieved success in both the classic mini transat and the Solitary Figaro classes. So over to you, Tom, to tell us how you get your weather information and how you use it.
Thanks a million, Paul. Very interesting. There, it's great. It's great to see that whatever sort of sailing you're in, there's always big debates about different models and which one is right and which one is wrong. So it's very, very interesting. Same with us. After every leg, there's always a big chat on the GFS, the ROM page, all sorts of things. So I put a little bit in my speech about it. So I went up to it. So screen share on. Hold on, sorry. As you said, I am based in Brittany, but at the moment I am in the Irish countryside and the weather is quite bad, so it's a bit windy outside and the internet has been going on and off. So I hope I get to the end of this without getting cut off. And then if I get cut off, I probably won't even notice. So anyway, so the idea of this talk is to chat a little bit about strategy. And a methodology, a little bit about how to develop the system I use or the system we use to try and develop a strategy during an offshore race. The pile, I call it. So we'll go on about that in a minute. I'll just tell you a little bit about myself. So as Paul said, I'm Irish. I live now in France and I race on a beautiful Beneteau Figaro that you'll see in the photo there. The idea of which, I don't know if many of you have heard much about it, but the boat or the class of boat, the idea of it is that it's this monotype meaning that everyone in the fleet has exactly the same boat. It started in the 1970s, back when things were a group of French sailors decided that they wanted to make a class that would be easy for general public or everyday people to understand. So no rating, no calculations, and no point system. So basically, the idea is that everyone has exactly the same boat. The first person across the line wins. The big event of the season is a race called the Solitary Figaro, which is a 4-leg race. Each leg about between 400 and 600 miles, where we go off for 3 or 4 days at sea. We come in, we just stop a break, and we go off again 4 times. And the winner is the person, man or woman, who has done the whole 4 legs in the least time. So it's very, very interesting. A great thing about it is that because all the boats are due to the fact that all the boats are identical, you learn very, very quickly things different from your mistakes, more or less. Because if, for example, there's a split in the course and you're one side and someone else is the other side, chances are the difference is made because you might not have had the right strategy, or you might not have been in the right place at the right time. So we learn lots of things. Whereas in IRC racing, of course, the problem is not the boats aren't the same. So it's hard to judge yourself if you went the right way, because it could simply be because the boat over there is bigger or faster or slower or whichever. We also, it's going off subject a little bit, we also learn a lot of things about some of the most fashionable things, like in sail design, for example, sail tissues, cableless things, and all sorts of new modern things that are sold by sail lofts today that we get a chance to speed test them a lot, and sometimes with quite just surprising results. I'm afraid I can't see your questions because I'm sharing my screen, so I'll have to either Paul jump in if you have questions, maybe. Just that way, every now and again, I know you're all still there.
Well, we can take questions at the end.
Perfect. Paul. Okay, perfect. Glad you're still there. Yeah. So strategy. So I suppose the complicated thing about what I do is that most of the time I'm on my own on the boat. So I have to do all the jobs. I have to make the boat go fast and make it go in the right direction. So it kind of gives you a great way of having a nice simple system to try and decide where to go. Like everything, a lot of preparation and planning is important before you leave. And I just threw in this slide to kind of think a little bit about how us as human beings, how our brains tend to react. We tend to like making decisions. That's kind of it. It gives you a relaxing feeling, like we know when we decide what color we want to paint our house, what we're having for dinner, where we're going on holidays. It kind of relaxes you to make, once you've made a decision about something, which could be a bit dodgy when you're preparing a strategy for an offshore race, because you might very, very quickly, and I've seen it happen a lot of times, I've done it myself, 2 or 3 days out before the start, already have an idea in your head about what you're going to do. Whereas, as we've seen, the weather is a kind of an uncontrollable art that we can't, that is always changing and that we cannot control. That's what's so great about it, I suppose. So what I would like to say about that is just be important. A very important thing is not to do the human thing and try to make decisions too quickly, because everything is always changing. And that is the idea of strategy. Just to be clear about strategy, there's two important things in racing. One is strategy and one is tactics. Today, I'm really going to concentrate on strategy, because tactic is a whole other thing. When we talk about strategy, we talk really about the global idea of it, the planning that goes behind it. So the weather and all these factors that go into it, that we control or that we modify. Our strategy, of course, we can modify it during the race. Whereas tactics are really in real time, in what's happening on the water which are competitors at any time during the race. So meaning the boat-on-boat contact that you need to think of or adapt within a couple of minutes. For example, is starboard. A port starboard, your tactical decision will be, do you want to send the other guy to the right or to the left? Do you want to just go behind them or whatever? So now, but what I really want to talk about is strategy. So at any one time, there are all a number of these factors that we have to put in a pile. What I mean is that at any one time in a race, something is the most important thing. So there's always a list of priorities or a pile, a strategical pile up that we make, that we can make. We can easily just write it down on a bit of paper, or at least have it in our head, to enable us to decide where we go. So these are the things we're going to talk about: the synoptic wind, the sea breeze, local effects, the race course. What I mean by race course is the geometry of the race course and how it can change, tidal streams, and your competitors. I'm going to go through each one of these. Each one of these is probably a 45-minute topic or more, or a whole book in itself. But it's just to give you a little idea of what you need to master, or to try and master, or at least you need to have in your head if you want to create a good strategy and be able to adapt it at any time during a race. Okay, so I'll start with the synoptic wind, because it is it's what propels our boat. So it's kind of the first one to talk about. Just like Craig was talking, a good old-fashioned, honestly, what we do, one of the first things, or one of the things we look at straight away, or I always look at, is a good old-fashioned synoptic chart, because it gives you an overall photo. It's a click in one look. You have an idea of everything that is going on. What I usually tend to do is, or we would usually tend to do, is to, and I think is important, is to watch the synoptic charts and their evolution from about five days before the start. Not, as I said, not to get into a decision, definitely not to get into a decision, but first of all, to have an idea of what is going on from a synoptic scale, or on the surface of the Earth, and its evolution. What I mean by evolution is, for example, if we take this, there's a ridge of high pressure over the British Isles with a 1022 hectoisobars, or hectopascals. If, for example, the synoptic chart that I looked at yesterday was giving that at 121, and the day before was giving that at 120, it would give me an idea that the evolution is towards a ridge of high pressure that is becoming more in place, more stable. The pressure of this thing is increasing. So I would maybe compare that to the German charts, or even the Irish ones or the French ones. And if they're all in agreement that this ridge of high pressure, the barometric pressure is increasing since I've been watching the evolution, I would say, right, chances are this thing's going to stay in place during the race, or vice versa, of course. If the day before was at 123 or 124 and now it's dropping, I could say, okay, chances are this ridge of high pressure is going to become less imposing on the British Isles. Sorry if I get my words mixed up. I have been living in France, and with COVID, I got stuck over there for 22 months. So I'm a bit rusty on English terminology when it comes to weather. So, as I said, the evolution also, and two main things that we look for, when I look at a synoptic chart, is the isobars, the how close they are together. And another big thing is bend in the isobars. So if we see here, I don't know if you see my mouse, but for example, here, just by looking at this, I can see that in the west, further west we go, the more closer the isobars are together, which means obviously the more wind there is, and obviously the big bend. Whenever there's more wind, means there's more wind, means we can go faster. And the more bend there is in the isobars, or the curvature in an isobar, means that the greater the wind shift is, which means a modification of the race course and its geometry as we go. So there we go on the synoptic wind, as I said, and obviously, and of course, the stability of the air. From just by looking at this, we can have a good idea, because air tends to take the characteristics of what it travels over. If at the back of this, if we have a northwesterly wind that's going to come down, we can know that it's going to be cold air, that there's going to be clouds, there's going to be squalls. Here we can also see there's quite a big bend in the isobars, which means these fronts could actually be quite active, so it could get a bit hairy if they manage to come in across this ridge of high pressure that I've been watching or not for the last 4 or 5 days. Sorry. So these, after looking at these synoptic charts, the photo of what's going on, and probably comparing the German ones and the British ones and the French ones, to see if they're all more or less saying the same thing, there's a very good chance it's what's going to happen. Or if they're all over the place, I could say there's probably a weak feasibility in the thing. And then, of course, back to the famous grid models as we have. We tend to use a lot of them, as the lads were saying, the European DCWMF models, which were for a while unavailable because of some sort of spat between Squid and the European Centre. I don't know, to be honest. Which have recently become available on Predict Wind. So we just had them back this year. The ROMAR page, which are the French ones, the GFS, and the Econ, which is the German weather office. There's no point in going into too much detail. Just a couple of things. What I like to do, I say a lot of people probably use Windy and use coloring apps. So at sea, coloring the grid files can be a useful way of visualizing. This is in Adrena that I've done here. Can be an interesting way, a very quick way of seeing where the more pressure is. Like, for example, if we see along the coast, we can see that there's much less wind at the coast, there's more wind in the west. And then another thing that I like to do is to impose them, like we can see on Squid. You can see what you do is put all of the models one on top of the other, which can give you a very clear idea of where the wind is and where the shifts are and where our front might be if they're all in agreement of where our front is. I find they all seem to have their phases. They all seem to have their good days and their bad days. For example, I don't know if it's got anything to do with anything, but the Solitary Figaro is in August, starts in August every year. And the last 2 years, the RYA page, which is the French weather, with the French model, have been a bit iffy. They've always been around that time of year a bit iffy, which happens to coincide with the French when everyone in France is on holidays. So we kind of used to joke about that and say, I wonder, is that their thing? Are they all on holidays? Another thing I tend to notice is the HERLAM, the CUP, the European Weather HERLAM, which is the high resolution European thing, has been for a couple of legs or race I've done quite precise in the English Channel. But as I said, they all have their little phases, they all have their little traits or not. What is important is that it's important before a certain race, for example, the Fastnet, is to keep an eye on all of them every day. Just download them all, have a look at what they're saying, and have a look at what really happens out in the water, if you can, of course. Something that we would try to do, so that when you arrive at the start line, you have an idea of which of the models is in phase, or is having a good day, or isn't on holidays, or whichever way it works. For example, there's a thing, the Icon, again, pontoon chatter. A lot of people, especially in the Figaro class, because it's new, people don't like it. Maybe it's a German model. People don't really seem to believe it that well. And for a while, actually, one thing I noticed that a lot of people didn't notice, that it's very, very, very similar to the European weather model, which at the time was not available. You could compare them on Windy, because Windy had both of them, and then by comparing them, I would see that the two of them are very, very similar. And then the grid, you could use the Icon for routing, which is a kind of way. Also, another thing that we have with the Figaro is that we leave only with the grid files that we have at the start. So we can't get any grid files while at sea. So I am a bit of a geek. So I have a little bit of software called Model Accuracy, which allows you to analyze in real time. So it compares the wind and all the data that you get from the instruments on the boat, and compare it with the models to tell you in real time which is the most precise. And you can pick it by hours. So a couple of times, it's happened to me quite a good few times this time of the year. The Econ has been the most precise after three or 4 days of sailing. So when you're getting into the end of a leg, when all the others, I don't have a clue what's going on, I got up to 90% precision with the Econ it could be just over a 6-hour period, or the position of a front, for example, when we were coming back from the Fastnet. Anyway, sorry, went on a bit there. But that's my little look on the famous grid models. I thought also the English ones were available on Predict Wind as well. There's a UK MO. But what I would say is keep it simple, because at the end of the day, if you do too many of these things, it's a great way to knots in your head. The tide. So that is the first thing, the synoptic wind. One of the conditions where the synoptic wind it's something that is generally at the top of our pile of our strategical pile up, because it's something that it influences very directly. The tide. So next thing, the tide is probably the one thing in our whole strategical pile up that we can anticipate, because we can know it months in advance. We know what time our race start is going to be, so you can already prepare in your little road book. Road book is the equivalent of a passage plan that I'll tell you about later. We know what way the tides are going to be at the start of a race. We can already prepare what way they're going to be, and where they're strong and where they're not. Things, of course, one of the biggest influencers of whether the tide is high up on our list of priorities or high up on our pile is our point of sail. Are we sailing against the tide, or are we sailing against the wind and against the tide, or are we sailing downwind against the tide? What I mean is, here's a boat sailing upwind against the wind and against the tide. Because the two of them are in the same direction, so the wind of 10 knots and the tide of 1 knot, it gives the whole conveyor belt is moving along, which means there's a drop in the apparent wind of 9 knots, of 1 knot, sorry, which gives us 9 knots. The other thing is that the boat itself, it's kind of like swimming across a river. If it's the angle of the boat to the tide is also more important when we're sailing upwind, because we sail at like what, 50 degrees to the wind maybe. All of that meaning that if you have to beat against the tide, there's a lot to be gained or lost by sheltering from the tide. So if, for example, north coast of Brittany or the south coast of England, of the UK, for a fastnet race, for example, if you're sailing upwind, the tide very, very quickly becomes at the top of your list of priorities, or at the top of the pile, for example. A little less damage downwind, because of course if you are sailing downwind and against the tide, the wind, the tide wind, as we say, it increases the apparent wind over the sails. It gives you a little bit extra. There's even talk, I've never seen it happen, but people have talked about in Figaro legs of it being faster to be in a stronger tide, because you're more wind in the sails and the spinnaker will fill. But I'm receptive. But people have told me that it does work, but I'm not going to try it. Then of course, so here we are for an example. One thing is, so what is very important when talking about the tide is, of course, to look at I've forgotten the word, the barometry, what the sea bed is like. What we always tend to look for is the slope. Whenever there's a steep slope in the seabed or the depth of the sea, there's always a stronger tide. So here, for example, there's like the north coast of Brittany, there's around the line of 50 meters. There's quite a steep slope, so we get a quite a strong acceleration of tide. So the aim of the game is either to stay on that slope if you're with the tide, or to shelter as much as you can from that. So unfortunately, you have to get out the nav book, prepare your nav, which you can do, of course, months in advance. For example, here, if I'm against the tide, I'm going to have to go into the rocks, as close to the rocks as I can, to shelter myself from the tide as much as I can, or even get little counter these, as we call them, which happens a lot in the north coast of Brittany, down the south coast of the UK. Portland Bill and Star Point are infamous for them. So that can really be the make or break of a race. So leaving, for example, the Solent to Land's End, if most of it is against if it's going to, chances are it's going to be against the wind, and a big part of it obviously are going to be against the tide. Straight away, before even doing any routings or anything, you put tide at the top of the pile, or very close to the top of the pile. Again, just some more examples here. We have the Channel Islands. Sorry, again, as you can see, just on the slope of where the depth has a steep inclination. You can see the new well, when they did the old charts, they have the little waves everywhere. It can be quite strong in there in the Russell. Also because it accelerates in the channel. And then what happens a lot, like in the Irish Sea or off Calais and Dover, you have sandbanks. So again, just the name of the game is to sail along the slope to try and get the most of the tide, or not, to sail on the bank. Okay, tide. So again, as I would say, when deciding if the tide goes on the top of the pile or not, the important thing is what way how strong the tide is. So first of all, if we're in Eeps or Springs, what way the depth of the water is like, and what way is there any much of a slope underneath us. Then another thing which is very, very important in the English Channel that I've seen happen a lot is the way the slack changes. You've probably seen this in the old atlases. This I just printed it out from Adrena because it was simpler. Whatever way it happens, the way the wave flows up the English Channel, is it always the switch or the change in the tide, or the slack in the tide always comes from the west. Whether here we have an ebb from the tide has been coming up and the ebb is arriving, we see it's from the west. Here on the next one, the tide has been going down and the flow is coming from the west. What does that mean? It means from a strategical point of view is that the positioning of your boat on the east-west can often be a lot more important than the north-south. Meaning that if the tide isn't very high up on your pile, on your strategical pile, for example, when there's not a whole lot of wind, the east-west can be much more important than the north-south. What I mean, for example, here, I don't know if you can see my arrow, but if I've seen examples of a boat just half a mile ahead of another one, who has been half a mile further west, who has gotten the ebbing tide here, if you will, that gets sucked off, whereas the other one is always in less tide, and all that does is stretch the elastic, because as he gets further west, he gets stronger tide, the elastic stretches more and more and more and more. So the positioning east-west is something very important to think of in the English Channel. And also, to a certain extent, the north-south, meaning, as you can see, the tide is always stronger in the southern part of the channel. So around Brittany, it's conic. The slack is as a conic kind of shape, meaning that here, if you see up here, the triangular kind of shape, a lot less tide here than here. So, for example, it might be a good idea if you're attacking out of the English Channel here to come south to get stronger tide. Again, in strong tides, or how the tide could position or could decide your positioning, especially if there's light wind or you're sailing upwind. Okay, sea breeze. I put. Am I still there, Paul? Yeah, you can still hear me all right, can you? Just to check.
That's fine.
Okay, I'll keep going.
I'm looking at two screens. One is my chairman's screen, and the other one is a delegate screen, and there is a bit of a delay, but it's fine.
Okay, I'm still there. Okay, I'll keep going. Sea breeze. So this is kind of, I put this as a kind of cynical thing in a way, because I googled sea breeze and I got the most basic diagram that we have. What I mean by this is, it's quite rare. Well, it is quite rare. It does happen that we get the perfect sea breeze, where the lovely fluffy clouds over the land, and you see the sea breeze coming in from offshore, and then it just keeps up and picks to the right. What I mean by this is, it is important to understand the dynamics of an actual sea breeze, of a real classic sea breeze. But it's also important to understand that what I've seen a lot is that even if the conditions aren't all lined up to have a perfect sea breeze, the heating of the land always has some sort of effect, or quite often has some sort of effect on the race course, or on the wind that we have. What I mean by that is that sometimes, depending, a big factor is of course from where the synoptic wind itself comes from. We have a system of quadrants, meaning if the certain ones are favorable or unfavorable. The classic, when we first start off, we would imagine that the most favorable one is an offshore wind, or onshore wind, sorry, meaning a wind coming from the sea towards the land. But on the contrary, the most important part of the whole pump is what happens up in the upper layers. So for each one of these quadrants, or for each different direction, there is a different influence on the synoptic wind, on the sea breeze, or the thermal wind that we end up having. There's so many things that count, meaning first of all, the quadrant. There needs to be a proper or a good difference in temperature between about 2 or 3 degrees for something to happen. The tide, if the sea is high in the middle of the day, there's a chance that's going to help the sea breeze or help the pump. Stability of the air, stable wind more or less means that the rising that is needed over the land is going to be blocked. If there's a big huge anticyclone sitting over where you are, you think it's going to be nice and sunny, it'd be great, but the compression from above is going to stop any of this or hinder this. Anyway, important to know. And what happened to us quite a lot this year was that we had the quadrant 2, so northeasterly wind at the end of summer, where the sea was quite warm. A big anticyclone, so not a whole lot of things. And what happened is a big huge zone of conflict sea breeze. What did you get? So basically you had from the coast out for about 10 miles a big zone with no wind, a little bit of wind right at the beach, and then offshore you had the northeasterly wind that was pumping. Another thing that happened quite often was that happens quite often in Brittany. I don't have Brittany, but you could have off the south coast of the UK, Ireland even, is that if you have quadrant 3, what happens is that it simply reinforces the actual wind itself without any moving or without any everything, with a little bit of a shift to the left. And we even had it this year. This year for quite a while actually. If you can see here, it wasn't even a sea breeze. It was just that the immense heating over the continent caused the kink in the isobars. drop the pressure on a very local scale, which meant that every day the continent would heat up, the isobar would kink, and the whole way across the Bay of Biscay would be a left-hand shift, which meant that even though we were 200 miles offshore, it wasn't a sea breeze, but there was a thermal influence on the wind that we had at that given time, which meant that left-hand shift, which means that the synometry of the race course was changed. So what I mean by that is just to be conscious of the sea breeze, not just the sea breeze, sorry, the classic sea breeze, but the thermal influence that the sun can have any time on the wind at local level, and not to be blocked in this thing saying that there'll be a nice fluffy cloud and then the wind will come in and it'll shift to the right and everything will be great. Can be helped a lot just to look at the zone you're going to be sailing in, if you there's a chance of doing that, and also the arome model. Honestly, when it's in good form, it is great at showing this sort of thing. It's especially the arome HD. You can't make sure not to use it for routing, but it will show the zones of conflict, or it'll show the little left shift, or it'll even show the little kink in the isobara off the coast off in the Bay of Biscay. I'm going to accelerate a little bit because I'm waffling on a wee bit. So anyway, local effects. What I mean by that is anywhere where there's the land and the sea, or we're sailing in close to the land, there is always an influence, because the wind over the land, as it travels over the land, it is slowed down more than over the sea by friction, which means it's always orientated a little bit more to the left. And this, of course, has an influence over the wind that we sail in. So, for example, up here I have an offshore wind, which turns a little bit to the right the further offshore you get, while accelerating. And then what we have is a converging coast or a diverging coast. There's a whole playbook of these things. If you need one, I have one. Burno, Strategy and Meteor, it does exist in English. There's a whole playbook of these things. So it's important to know, especially, for example, sailing along the south coast of England with a westerly wind, if you have a diverging coast where the wind is completely parallel to the coast, and also the wind to the left. Very important. So by local effects, what I mean is cannot also only be the land, but also clouds, squall clouds, meaning that anything that has an effect over the wind on a local area. For example, sailing across the Atlantic in the trade winds, we get a lot of squall clouds, so local effects, or what I mean by local effects being squall clouds, can go very high up the pile, because we're in the trade winds. The wind itself is more or less stable. It'll shift a little bit, but the clouds go quite high up in the pile. Okay, local effects. The geometry of race course. This is a very, very important thing, especially sailing offshore, because this is back to dinghy days. This is out of a book on dinghies. The difference between a split. So, for example, if as we say, the wind is going right, we go right. Can very quickly offshore become very, very. You can win a lot or lose a lot, because, for example, a 20-degree shift for a distance of what would be originally 100 meters will end up winning you or losing 34 meters. But in this case, offshore, if you have a 10-mile split and the wind shifts to 20 degrees, you end up doing 3.4 miles, which is half an hour, which is quite a lot. So what I mean by that is important is the geometry of the race course, and meaning the shortest distance from A to B. Unfortunately, in sailing, by definition, is always changing. So, for example, when would that be high up on the list? For example, in an oscillating wind, if we had loads of these clouds, every time the wind shifts, the geometry of the race course is shifting. So just if that goes high up on the list, on the pile, the strategy pile, that's it. This is probably getting a little bit technical, but I'll say it anyway. Sometimes the fastest direction, the fastest route from one point to another may not be the most direct, meaning that by bearing away a certain degrees, rather than saying from A straight to B, imagine with your GPS, you have a waypoint from A straight to B. Sometimes by bearing away a little bit, the boat will accelerate a little or a lot. At some stage, you will have to correct this. So this is for a correction at halfway. For example, if the wind is going to lift a little bit, or for example, you just want to get as close to the fastnet or as close to the next waypoint as you can before the wind dies altogether. It can be advantageous to bear away a little bit to try and accelerate a little bit. For a correction of 10 degrees, you just need to increase your speed by 2%. It's not even 2%, it's 1.7%. So think about it for sailing at 6 knots, it's barely even 0.1 of a knot. So it's important to sometimes calculate that. Most routings will calculate for it, but to have it in your head. Unfortunately, the thing is not the same thing is not the same for sailing upwind. For upwind, by bearing weight of 5 degrees, which is fairly easy to do, unfortunately, especially if there's a bit of a sea, you need to guarantee a 10% increase in VMG. So if you're to have equal VMG, so if your boat is at 6 knots upwind, you bear away by 5 degrees, it has to be at least 6.6 knots, which is quite complicated for a lot of boats, I'd say. And the competitors, the big one. I kept this I was going to put it at the front because a big error that a lot of us do, or something that a lot of us tend to do is to automatically put the competitors at the top of the list, at the top of the pile. We're always influenced, especially some of us like that might not have confidence in what we're doing, especially what happened to me a lot in this fleet where I'm kind of stuck with all these rock stars. Sometimes I lose a lot of confidence in myself, or I wouldn't, especially when you're tired, you're fatigued, and you don't really know what to do. You tend to put the competitors quite high up the list, which can be good. For example, if there's nothing in your whole pile that stands out, if there's a stable wind, you're just sailing from one place to another, there's not really many local effects and there's no influence on the synoptic wind, it's not the time to start taking risks. So the competitors will go to the top of the list. One thing, if I come back to the tide, I skip back up. One time not to put the competitors at the top of the list, or something, it's an error that we quite often do, is if you're sailing, for example, if you're tacking out the English Channel, if there's a boat further to your west, so ahead of you, he's never in the same tidal timing as you are. He's not in the same tide. He doesn't have the same influence. He doesn't at all have the same strategy. So if you tack every time he tacks, you're more or less making guaranteed that you're not going to do the same as him or do as well as him. But that's what I would say. Other times to put a competitors at the top of the pile is, of course, if you're leading or you're doing well and you want to consolidate where you are, you would pick your competitors in your group and say, right, all the rest goes below, but the competitors are what my direct competitors are doing remains at the top of the list. Okay, voila, that's it. Another one that I would put in sometimes that I always hesitate to put in is sea state, which can be an influence, especially if you're sailing upwind, but it's not always there. So I would maybe put it in brackets, throw it in there. It's the state of the sea, which of course is influenced by most of these other effects. A little bit about a toolkit. This is probably about everything that we have. Roadbook. I'll just go into the roadbook quickly. What a roadbook more or less is a passage plan, I suppose, as the RYA would have called it. But what I would like to prepare is a strategical passage plan, meaning that, as I say, you divide the race course into different sections. So the start to the first mark, and then maybe here we have an example like from, I can't remember what the boy is, Roscoff to the Scillies, and then from the Scillies to the Fastnet, and then back again. All of the time putting in, you could write in the top of the pile, so you could start up with saying wind shift, or the synoptic wind is at the top of the pile, is at the top of the pile, competitors are at the top of the pile, whichever you want. And then a couple of little things that I like to put into them, like for example, I'll start with decision-making moments. So there are times in a race, when you have to be sure you can't win a race. All you have to do is make sure not to lose it. Meaning that I would write in this thing, there's not a whole lot going to go on. Sail straight, eat, hydrate, and rest, because you're going to have to be fresh. For example, going around the Fastnet and there's a cold front going to be through, and there's going to be 35 knots of wind. Things like that. Even if you're crude racing, I think it's important to put this sort of thing in, because if you're in charge of the weather, your navigator, if you spend all the race up sitting in front of the computer, you're not going to make very good decisions at the end of it. So even for yourself, or even if you're a skipper for the rest of the crew, saying hydrate, rest, eat, not a whole lot going to happen. Don't take any risks, just sail. Maybe you might be back just one after the other. So the decision-making moments, on this times not to make big decisions. And then there's also times that I like to put in, if there is one, is key positioning moments. So key placements, meaning if they're not the whole time, but like, for example, going around the Fastnet, it would be important to be to the right of my competitor or to the left of my competitors, and it's very really is a key moment that could be win or lose the race, mean winning or losing the race. Important to put them in at the start if you see them, because when you arrive at the Fastnet, you're going to be completely wrecked. You won't really know what's going on. And then bearing and distance, and as I said, life on board, so rest, things. Then all the rest of the other stuff that the lads will probably talk about, grid files, weather sources, synoptic charts, routing software. What I would say about, I'll finish up on this, about routing software, is everyone more or less runs RYA or Expedition. They're getting more and more high tech. They can do more and more things. You can tell the routing to anchor. You can even, the latest version of RYA, it can even tell the routing to go backwards, which means easier cones go back. It can, if it's quicker to go backwards and go around something, it can do it. You can put in corrections for the sea state. You can put in corrections for the waves. You can put in all sorts of corrections for sail changes, which I thought was great for a while. I started playing with all these things, and at the end, and then I realized at the end of the day, the problem is you're putting so much information into the routing that it becomes impossible to analyze it. So it becomes impossible to know why it's going one way or why it's going another way. And at the end of the day, what the routing is doing is just, it does the same thing as you do as your strategical pile up, if you know what I mean. He's just putting things in front of the other to get the boat from one place to another. So what I would say is it's important to do your own routings, I think, even if you have the help of an external router. It's important to do your own. That way you can analyze them and understand what's going on and put in this little list of priorities, the pile up. So what is on top of what is the most important thing at any given moment, to compare it with routing and understand what he's doing. There you go. That's about it, I think. So thank you all for listening. One last picture of my beautiful boat, Smurfit Kappa Kingspan, and a little dolphin in the Irish Sea.
Well, thank you very much for that, Tom. A fantastic amount of information in there.
Too much, maybe.
Well, yeah, I mean, my head's spinning. I don't know about everybody else, but the thing that amazes me is you know, where you get the time to do all of that and sail the boat at the same time, bearing in mind that you're doing it all yourself. You must be knackered.
I'm all right. No, I'm all right. Now, I'm to be honest, preparing the PowerPoint is more. I'm less confident with Excel or with PowerPoint than all of that. But I suppose the idea of it was just exactly for, as you said, that you do end up being knackered, is to try and have a simple system in place, which is this strategical pile up of a thing, just to make it easier.
So I presume the one of the problems is, which you touched on towards the end, is if you have too much information, you just confuse yourself.
Exactly.
You've got to select the key bits of information and focus on those.
Exactly. Yeah, that's exactly it.
Yeah. So as far as the weather's concerned, what are the key sources that you're looking at? What sources of information do you focus on? Do you think are the best?
The Bracknell or the Met Office synoptic charts I would look at a lot.
Yeah.
The German ones, the Deutsche Wetter Central.
Yeah.
And so from time to time the French synoptic charts, but they're not the same. The isobars are they're 4 hectopascals instead of 5, or 5 instead of 4. I can't remember, so it's a bit confusing. So that I would look for from synoptic charts. The satellite images, I actually forgot about that in the sea breeze. That I had one in there. The satellite images are also a great way to know if there's a sea breeze, for example, things like that. And then the grid files, all the 1,001 grid files you have available, I suppose. As I said, depending on what time of year it is, so that's why. But I suppose it's easy for me because I'm always doing it. I'm always sailing every week of the year. I'm sailing, so I'm always looking at grid files. So I always have a fairly good idea of which one is on form. You know, so that's probably easier.
Yeah. But basically, you're favouring the official weather forecast information, the official synoptic charts from forecasters, above the output of the models.
Yeah, well, it's the same information though. Like as far we've always the synoptic chart for the Econ, for example, will always be more or less the same as the grid files. If you know,
right? Okay,
does that make sense? Yeah, so it's kind of the same information. What is interesting is to know is if they're all in agreement. If the UK are okay with the Germans, we are okay with the GFS, which gives you kind of a good idea of the precision of the things. And for example, which could say, sorry, if none of them agree with each other. So if all the grid models are showing completely different things, you could say, all right, the synoptic wind, I'm going to drop it down my pile because it's not very, I can't be certain of how it is or of its direction. So I will think more of the race course, for example. I'll sail simply and sail at the next mark.
Yeah, I think I'm guilty of confusing myself. Yes, what I meant is it's the different models rather than anything else. Right, questions. Karen Main, can we see the toolkit again, please?
Sorry. Yeah, you can indeed. How do I go? Let's go share. Turn screen share on. Here we go. Deck. There we are. Can you see it?
Yeah.
Well, I suppose the road book is what I was talking about. Is a passage plan, I suppose you could call it, as having a little plan. Grid files, which you either get from Weather, Squid, Weather 4D, or now Predict Wind, which have the UK ones, UKMO, and something called Spire, which is like a private company, I think. I didn't look that too much into it.
Yeah.
Weather sources with Synoptic Charts, as I said, and Windy. To be honest, Windy is a great way of, first of all, the arome. If you put the arome model on Windy, you will have local effects. You can have the sea breeze. You can have how the wind accelerates around the headland. And it's the same models. It's always a little bit delayed, so that you get the models probably sooner in Squid or Weather 4D than you will in Windy, because Windy needs the time to turn them into a website.
Yeah.
And then routing software, again, RYA Expedition are the expensive ones, and then Squid and Predict Wind, you have basic routing things on them. And I should probably put Polar and Select should probably be above instrument calibration, because of Polar and Select is very technical. Now this is things that we would make ourselves with RYA that we're always kind of working on. The important thing is that you have your instruments correctly calibrated, otherwise you're telling them the wrong information.
Okay, and I mean the polars need to be accurate, otherwise you'll produce incorrect information.
Exactly, and we always do it at the start. You always get a polar off someone, any polar for this boat, and they'll send it to you, and you won't even look at it. So it's probably better off not doing a routing than doing a routing with a polar that you got off some forum or someone sent you that you haven't even looked at. Important thing of polar is, I know it's easy to say because I make them, but it's your own thing. It's your own little. It's important to know it and understand how it works, because they can tell you some really stupid things. Polars.
Yeah. Great. Well, look, thank you very much for that, Tom. I don't know whether you have to disappear or whether you can hang around for odd questions. People have them later on.
I do have to shoot off, but if you have any questions now, fire ahead. Or
Any more questions?
I can see them there.
It's basically just people saying, fantastic talk. Phil Thomas, what was the name of the strategy bureau that you mentioned? What was that?
Strategy bureau.
Sorry, I don't understand the question.
Book? No. This is the French version, but there is an English version.
Strategy. Right.
There is an English one, an old English one.
Okay, it's a weather strategy book.
This one's been across the Atlantic a few times, as you can see.
I can see that. Okay. Well, thanks very much for that. Look, we've run out of time, Tom.
Sorry.
Thank you very much for a fascinating talk and a lot of information. So thank you. Now we're going to turn to Ken Campbell, who has just joined us.
Good afternoon.
Ken is in the United States. Where precisely?
New Hampshire.
New Hampshire, great. And Ken is a professional weather forecaster, or was. I think you're now retired. Is that correct?
That's correct. I retired the 1st of January. I started Commander's Weather in April of 1996, and I sold the company to my employees on the first of the year. But I've been forecasting weather since 1979, before my retirement. And it's interesting you mentioned all the computer models, is when I first started forecasting weather, that's when the computer models actually first started showing up, was way back then.
Yeah, indeed. Can I just provide a little bit more background, Ken, on the information that you provided earlier? You got your master's in '79 and set up commanders in '96. And over the years, you've provided marine weather forecasting services to a glittering range of events and people, including all the America's Cup and Whitbread Volvo ocean races since 1992 until 2015, all the Olympics since 1992, numerous record attempts, including Ellen MacArthur's around the world. So presumably you're going to be drawing on that for your talk.
Yeah, parts of it, obviously not all of it, but yes, we'll be talking a little bit about some of the things that I've seen during my 26 years at Commander's Weather. One thing to note, I am not a sailor, have never been a sailor, but I ended up forecasting weather for sailing. And one of the things that I found very important was to be directly involved with the sailors. So many times I was out on the water with them when they were racing in the America's Cup. And that's primarily what I'm going to be talking about today, is some of the cloud features that I saw through the years that helped to predict wind shifts that were coming onto the race course.
Yeah, I'm slightly confused as to why we've still got Tom showing as the main speaker here. Tom, can you switch off your camera and hopefully, yeah, that's it. Now, if I switch off my camera, hopefully.
And I don't hear you anymore, Paul.
No. Well, if you want, I'll tell you what, I've got your slides, don't I? So I need to start the presentation.
Okay.
There we are.
Go. Excellent. So anyways, what I'm going to talk about today is first off what we did at Commander's Weather for SailGP. And the whole thing with SailGP is they're trying to turn sail racing into a spectator sport. So the racing has to take place close to the shoreline. And we've got to find venues that where you're going to get large groups of people to come out to watch the races. And that's part of the whole story with SailGP. The second part of the talk is about some of the cloud formations that I saw in a couple of locations around the world, that those cloud formations actually helped forecast the weather and the wind shifts that were to come onto the race course. And those are features that you can see yourself that I found to be very, very important. So anyways, to start with SailGP, once again, what they're trying to do with SailGP is to turn sailing into a spectator sport. The America's Cup, when they used to race it off in Newport all the time, it was 6 to 10 miles offshore. If you're sitting on land, you can't see the race. So SailGP, they try to race in close to the shoreline, set up spectator stands so that the people, general population, can come out and enjoy watching sailboat racing. So obviously, the first thing that we did was a climatological overview at the various locations that they were interested in looking at around the world. So we had to find the best time of the day and the best month for the most reliable wind directions and wind speeds. Obviously, you don't want 50 to 60, 90-degree wind shifts taking place during a sailboat race. So they want to minimize that risk. They want to find locations where the wind directions are relatively stable and a high degree of stability. Second thing is We don't want too little wind because the boats can't race, and they don't want too much wind because all of a sudden the boats are crashing and burning and they're having all kinds of problems. So we looked at locations that had a high frequency of wind speeds between 7 and 16 knots, time of the day that it occurred and the months that it occurred. So those are the obvious things. But a couple other things that aren't so obvious with sailboat racing is it's a spectator sport. So they want areas where there's sunshine and very few showers so that people can come out and enjoy a day watching the racing on the water. Also, you have other locations where it's sunny all the time, but the temperature's 40 degrees C or warmer in the afternoon, and they don't want that either. So you're looking for a temperate location with a lot of sunshine and very few showers. Second thing is SailGP are fast, very fast multi-hulls. So they're very vulnerable to large seas. So we have to find locations that have small sea states. But one of the things that contributes to sea states, as you guys well know over in England, is tidal currents. Strong tidal currents against the wind will lead to very large seas. So that we were looking for locations that had small tidal currents, but you got locations like over in England or New York City, which is SailGP's been to several times. Tidal currents are strong there. So we've got to find times with tidal currents are at a minimum. So that factors into the location, time that you're going to have the racing, and the month you're going to have the racing. SailGP, the boats are all full of electronics. The race course is all electronic. So there's boundaries that the boats cannot sail across. So the boats are full of very expensive electronics. We cannot have thunderstorms. Nothing would hurt SailGP more than if you had a big thunderstorm and a lightning strike on one of the boats or one of the technical boats. So thunderstorm activity had to be at a minimum. So climatologically, we're looking for reliable winds, reliable wind speed, lots of sunshine, small seas, and very few thunderstorms. So that all factored into the climatology of it. Once we got past the climatology, we then did the weather forecasting for SailGP, which weather forecasting is done in advance and then also real time. Me personally, one of the books that I use frequently is Wind Strategy by David Houghton. David Houghton was a fantastic forecaster, understood what the sailboat racers needed. Tremendous book, and I followed it religiously. And a lot of the sailors that I had work for me during the America's Cup, I made them get that book and read it and understand it. And many of them carried the book out onto their weather boats during the racing to refer to it. And one of the things that David ascribed to was the sea breeze quadrants. And I do the same thing. I could spend half a day talking about sea breeze quadrants. We don't have time for that today, but that factors into all of my sea breeze forecasts of the sea breeze quadrants that are mentioned in David Houghton's book. SailGP. So when I sit down to do a race weather forecast, first thing, I need to know what's going on right now. So the first thing I always start with before I do a forecast is looking at satellite picture. Where are the clouds? How are they moving? What type of clouds do they look like to me? Quite frequently, I'm doing these forecasts before the sun's coming up in the morning. So I'm looking at infrared, which is just measuring the temperature of the cloud tops, which is a little bit more difficult telling exactly what type of clouds they are. But satellite animation, how the clouds are moving, what the clouds look like right now. One of the things I always check after that is the weather radar. I'll never forget an embarrassing situation. I've had many of them forecasting weather, but prior to practice in the America's Cup, I told everybody it wasn't going to rain. And about 20 minutes after I told them it wasn't going to rain, we had a shower. And there's nothing worse than sitting there watching the sailors get wet and you with them as well getting wet. So I always check the weather radar, even though I may think that it's not going to rain. And trust me, you guys should do the same thing. So that's the start of it. Satellite radar. Next thing I do is I always plot my own map. And it's interesting, Paul mentioned using maps from the Weather Bureau. I actually produce my own maps. I trust what I do. I trust the people that I work with. And to be honest with you, nothing against any of the other forecasters in the national bureaus, but I just do my own. And that particular link that I have right there is from, will give you access to the various airports around the world. The beauty of it, it not only gives you the current data, but the previous 24 hours. So it's nice to know what's going on right at this moment, but also what happened before. So if I'm doing a race forecast in cows, I'll plot all the data from Land's End over to the Netherlands and all the buoy data and all the way down into northern France as well. If I think the weather's coming in from the northwest, I'll plot all the data and analyze it all the way through Ireland. So I'm a real data hog. I need to know what's going on all around the entire area, and I actually do it myself. And it's interesting, when I hire a young forecaster at Commander's Weather, they go, boy, that must take an awful long time for you to do that. And it actually doesn't. For me to plot all of that data, it takes about 5 to 10 minutes. But while you're plotting that data by hand, you're actually getting a feeling for what is going on with the weather pattern. So I find that very, very important. And it's interesting, when I first started forecasting weather back in the 1970s, we had very few weather models. And that's how we had to do it. We plotted our own surface maps. We did it every 3 hours, and we got a feeling for how the weather was changing. So that's what we relied on instead of weather models. So I always plot my own surface map, have a great feeling what's happening with the weather before I ever look at a weather model. So the next thing that I go to do the quadrant theory, just scroll backwards real quickly here. We have to know what the gradient wind is to do these sea breeze quadrants. So for example, quadrant 1 is when you've got a northwest gradient wind. And once again, this is northern hemisphere with a south-facing coastline. So quadrant 1 is the northwest gradient wind. Quadrant 2 is a northeast gradient wind. Quadrant 3 is a southwest gradient wind, also an onshore wind. And quadrant 4 is a southeast gradient wind, also an onshore wind. So I have to establish in my mind what the gradient wind is today. And yes, you can cheat, you can use the weather models, but I also, once again, like to look at real data. And it's not just the gradient wind at the surface where we are. We need to know what's going on aloft as well. So the wind's aloft, but another key thing to look for is any inversions. So what exactly is an inversion? As we all know, the temperature gets colder as you rise up into the atmosphere, especially if you're a skier. But that's not always true. In the most obvious time that's not true is right at daybreak or a little bit before daybreak, where the land tends to be, it's cooled all night, and right at the surface, the land is very cold. And quite frequently, it's colder right at the surface than it is just above the surface. That's what we call an inversion, is when the temperature actually rises as you go up. And if you got, any of the sailors have probably seen this many, many times. First thing in the morning as the sun comes up and you look out over the sea, you'll see that orange line right down on the horizon, right down on the surface. And that orange line is the pollution trapped underneath the inversion. So I have to know where that inversion is. If the inversion is a very large inversion, in other words, it's 10 degrees warmer at 1,000 feet than it is at the surface, it's going to take a long time for that inversion to disappear. And until that inversion's gone, we can't get a sea breeze circulation. So as long as you see that orange line on the horizon, you're not going to get much wind speed, if any at all. So I need to know where those inversions are. And one of the ways that I can do that is looking at real-time vertical profiles of the atmosphere. And they launch balloons at various locations around the world at 0 UTC and 1200 UTC. Unfortunately, 0 and 1200 are not all the times that I'm sitting there doing weather forecasts. So they don't frequently line up with when I'm doing the forecast. Still, I like to look at what was actually measured before I look at a vertical profile on the weather models. And that second link that I give you is a website where you can go in and you can look at the vertical profiles in high resolution from the GFS model, which is the U.S. global weather model. You can enter in the latitude and longitude of any location in the world and get a vertical profile every 3 hours, up to 364 hours or something like that. But what I do is I enter the latitude and longitude of the race circle, and that gives me an idea of where the inversion is, when the inversion is going to clear or disappear during the day. It also tells me what the winds look like aloft. So, for example, let's say we wake up in the morning and we've got a northwest wind at 3 knots. But when I look at the vertical profile and it's 700 feet, the wind is northwest at 21. I know in a little bit of time, as the land warms up, the wind speeds are going to increase to 15 to 20 knots or more. But if I also look at the vertical profile of the wind at 700 feet or 1,000 feet is northwest at 5 knots at less, I know the gradient wind is going to be very, very weak, and we've got a great opportunity as sea breeze. So I don't just look at what's going on right at the surface, but I look at what's going on above the surface. So very, very important as far as doing the forecast for the sea breeze. Then I'll access the weather models. And there's a lot of weather models now where literally, like I said, I was in the advent of the weather models. There's literally dozens and dozens and dozens of weather models. I generally use the GFS in the European model, not because I think they're superior. I do think the European model is better than the GFS in most situations, but they're the ones that I'm most used to and most comfortable with, and I know the little idiosyncrasies, the positives and negatives of both of them, and I find that very, very important. I also like the high-resolution North American model, which is literally only for North America. That runs out to 84 hours, but it's notoriously pretty horrible once you get past 24 hours. But I love that weather model, high resolution for inshore racing and short-term periods, no more than 24 hours. Just one other mention about weather models. I'll never forget one of the times that we were racing up, Volvo race. We were up in Stockholm, Sweden, and we had access to a whole suite of weather models. And I knew we were going to get a sea breeze that day. And I strongly felt the sea breeze was only going to be about 6 to 12 knots. Anyways, one of the weather models, it happened to be the Canadian weather model, had a sea breeze of 20 to 24 knots. And I'll never forget Kenny Reed, who was the skipper of the, but Ken, how do you know for certain? I can't make it 100% guarantee. He goes, well, we've got to bring out all these sails, and I'm there. It's not going to be 20 to 24 knots. I do not see any scenario where that's going to happen. He goes, okay, fine. We won't bring out the sails, but realize that we're 25 miles from the race course, and if it's blowing 20 to 24 knots, we're going to be in big trouble. But that's part of the problem is if you look at a dozen weather models, you're going to find one out of that dozen or more that it's going to be a clunker that day. So I limit the information I look at to generally 2 or 3 weather models so that I don't get all this confusion. And I use those 2 in all of the bases up to that point to make my forecast. And the other thing is, once I make that forecast and pass it out, especially if I'm there for an America's Cup, I'm out with the guys. And I can update that forecast up to 5 minutes before the start of the race. But you need a basics of what's going on and what you think is going to happen next, and then you access the weather models. And the last thing I mentioned is, once again, you've got to factor into the tides, especially for SailGP, where they're very vulnerable to sea state. So in the Solent, New York City, other location where there's big tides, that's also put into the weather forecast as well for SailGP. Once the race period, once you're into the racing day, the boats are docked out, we're responsible to make sure that they're protected from any unusual weather situations that come up during the race. Severe thunderstorms, winds that are much stronger than expected. So we monitor the forecast throughout the entire racing period to make sure that they're safe. We don't just assume that the weather forecast is going to be accurate and perfect the whole day. And I'd love to say that they are all the time, but unfortunately, they just don't always work out to be perfect. And like I say, with an America's Cup, with the Olympics, I'm out with the guys as much as possible. I will not go on to the ocean race with them in the Volvo, but I'm also out there for all the import racing as well. And by being out there and experiencing the weather that they experience, it makes me a better weather forecaster. So anyways, that's what we do for SailGP. Any questions that you may have regarding that? So the next thing, we're going to talk about clouds. And before I go into Auckland, New Zealand, I just want to give you my first experience going out in the America's Cup. And once again, I'm not a sailor. I will never be a sailor. Excuse me. I have done races, and I love the day races. I am no fan of the overnight races. I like my bed. I like to sleep in my own bed. But the very first time I went out with the America's Cup sailor was in San Diego, California in 1995. And I'd never even been out on the water before, not even a whaleboat cruise or anything like that. Anyways, I went out onto the America's Cup boats, and I literally couldn't stand up in the boat. I had to crawl across when they tacked. I'm better at it now. But that whole first day, I just sat there and I watched the masthead data. I watched the clouds. I watched what they were doing. It was two-boat testing. That first day was pretty fascinating. But I'll tell you, 6 hours of two-boat testing is, and after years of doing it, it's pretty boring. But anyways, I sat there, I watched how the sea breeze changed the whole day. And it was probably about 4:30 in the afternoon, I started watching these lower clouds coming in. And as I looked out towards the horizon, they were hard to see. But when they got overhead, I could see the filaments of those clouds. And keep in mind, it's all I had to do. I'm not racing the boat. I'm not doing anything on the boat. I'm just watching the weather. So I'm watching the filaments of these clouds come overhead. And one of the things that I noticed is the wind speed started to drop. So it went from about 8 to 8.5 knots down to 7.5 knots. And at the same time, the wind direction kept oscillating to the left. It was going from 240 to 230, 225. And by the time we got done, the clouds covered about 60, 65% of the sky, and the wind speeds had dropped about 2 knots. And the wind had moved about 20 degrees, 20, 25 degrees left. So anyways, Peter Gilmore comes up and he goes, so what did you think? I said, it was pretty interesting what happened when those clouds started coming overhead. He goes, what do you mean? I said, the clouds started coming overhead. And he looked up, he goes, oh yeah, so what happened? I said, the wind shifted left and the wind speeds came down. Oh, really? I said, yeah, you didn't see that. He goes, oh, we're just sailing the boat. I knew the winds were moving, oscillating left, but he goes, I didn't notice the clouds. I said, yeah. I said, it happened with the clouds. So anyways, I end up watching the clouds. And anyways, when I first got down in Auckland, that was the very first thing that I noticed was the clouds. So anyways, just to bring you up to speed with the America's Cup racing in Auckland, in 1999 to 2003, the racing was out here in the Rocky Gulf. The race circles were just south of Tieri Island and came all the way down to the southern half of the Rocky Gulf. In the most recent America's Cup, the racing was generally down in Waitemata Harbor, just off of the container port in Auckland. Occasionally, if they were racing with northeast and northerly winds, they would go up into the very southernmost portion of the Rocky Gulf. The other thing is they changed the time of the day of the racing. We generally started racing about 1 o'clock in the afternoon, and we were generally done around 4 or 5 o'clock. But our race courses were 6 to 7 miles, 6 legs. Their race courses were much smaller and much shorter races, so they were able to start around 4 o'clock in the afternoon. And where we raced a lot in northeast winds, they raced a lot in southwest and west winds. And anyways, that's the difference in the race courses and those 2 sessions down there. But what I noticed when I first got there was a line of clouds that were off to the west and the southwest of the race course. And they were, I described them as convergence cumulus clouds. But you would look at them and they were cumulus clouds that generally started about 3,000 feet off the ground, and they would go up to about 6,000 to 7,000 feet. During the summertime, they occasionally would build up high enough and you get a shower or thunderstorm out of them. But what was interesting about those clouds is that they were convergence clouds. Quite frequently, we had northeast gradient winds or northeast sea breezes on the Rocky Gulf. But over in the Tasman Sea, where the water was colder than the water coming in on the Pacific Ocean, the water was colder in the Tasman Sea, and they had a southwest sea breeze over there. And where those 2 winds met were where those clouds were. Right where those winds met together, they came in together, the air rose up, formed those clouds, and you had that band of clouds. Quite frequently, the southwest to west sea breeze, being the cooler sea breeze, tended to be stronger. So that band of clouds during the day would move from the middle of the North Island, Northland, towards the Rocky Gulf. And once again, it's all I had to do all day in 2-boat testing was to watch those clouds. And those clouds became very, very important. And there were many times that our base was where that A is in Auckland on the picture. And we were racing out in the Rocky Gulf, which was probably about 15 to 20 miles away. We get done with racing, we come back into our base camp, and the wind would be southwest to west at 15 to 20 knots. We've been sailing in the Rocky Gulf in northeast winds at 10 to 15 knots. But we would sail right through that band of clouds to get into those southwest winds. And there would be no wind underneath that band of clouds. So watching how that band of clouds moved relative to where we were on the Rocky Gulf proved to be vitally important. And there was one particular race that our navigator was mic'd up for the live broadcast. They had cameras on the mast so they could watch what was going on. And there were several people in the crew that were mic'd up. And we learned very quickly about those clouds. And we developed a strategy to deal with those clouds if they moved onto our race course. And the question was always, do we stay with the old breeze, the northeast wind, or do we tack or jibe over to get into that new breeze with that southwest wind coming in? And quite frequently, that southwest wind was stronger than the northeast wind. But sometimes it moved very slowly, sometimes it moved very quickly, and sometimes it never reached our race course. But that particular day, that band of clouds was coming out into the race course. And Ed Smythe was our navigator. And we were going upwind towards the top mark in a northeast wind. And Ed was mentioning as we approached the top mark, going to jibe, we're going downwind. Band of clouds will be coming out before we reach the bottom mark. Then the discussion began, are we going to stay in the old breeze or we tack over to the new breeze? We decided to tack over to the new breeze. And once again, the most important thing to remember is there's no wind underneath those clouds. So you're going to hit that southwest wind shift, and wind speeds may only be 4 or 5 knots. When you hit that first wind shift underneath the clouds, we got to sail into the header, guys, sail into the pressure. We tack on the pressure. So this whole discussion took place on the boat before they reached that cloud. And they tacked through and they ended up winning that race. And they got called into the jury room because they thought they had gotten outside assistance. But it was all because that they had paid attention, they developed a plan, and they developed a strategy. So once again, this isn't the only place that I've seen these convergence clouds. And we're going to touch on another particular location. But anyways, just the details of the line of convergent clouds, northeast winds on the Rocky Gulf, southwest winds on the Tasman Sea. Quite frequently, it came out onto the Rocky Gulf. But keep in mind that underneath that band of clouds, the winds are light and shifty. You want to make sure you don't tack underneath those clouds. So another location that I've seen a similar thing, and this, I've raced out on Long Island Sound a couple of times. And Long Island Sound is a very fascinating location. But I've also seen this happen over into the Gulf of St. Tropez. Similar type of situation. So Long Island Sound has several different sea breezes. One, you'll have a southwest or southerly sea breeze will probably start around 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock in the morning, up along the south shore of Connecticut. Keep in mind, during the summertime, the water temperatures on Long Island Sound can get up to 23, 24, 25 degrees C. But at the same time, or actually a little bit before that, sea breeze will be starting on the Atlantic Ocean on the south coast of Long Island. And the water temperatures there most frequently are about 20 21 at the same time. So that sea breeze on the south shore of Long Island tends to be stronger. But at the same time, if it's a sea breeze day, on the north shore of Long Island, you'll get a very light northerly wind along the bays and the inlets along the north shore of Long Island. So one of the things that you'll notice is that you got a southerly wind on the north side of Long Island Sound and a north wind on the south side of Long Island Sound. That's divergence. So that means in the middle of Long Island Sound, there's no wind at all. So that's the first important thing. But over Long Island itself, the island, the northerly wind is meeting with that southerly sea breeze coming off the Atlantic, and you'll see a band of sea breeze cumulus clouds develop right across Long Island. Every single morning, around 11 o'clock in the morning, when there's a sea breeze going on Long Island Sound and on the Atlantic Ocean, you'll see that band of clouds form there. Now, you don't see it out on the eastern end of Long Island where there's so little land. You may see one or two cumulus clouds pop up there. And generally, you'll never get a northerly wind there. It generally only happens over the more metropolitan, built-up area of the bulk of Long Island itself. So what I found very interesting is I watched those clouds, and we're always sailing in the nice sea breeze on the Connecticut shoreline, staying right up close to the shoreline because you get too far offshore, and there's no wind at all. And we don't want to sail in that meager northerly sea breeze over on the north side of Long Island. So anyways, I'm sailing along at 3:30, 4 o'clock in the afternoon. And once again, I'm not sailing the boat. I'm just looking at clouds. And all of a sudden, the clouds are gone. There is no cumulus clouds over Long Island at all. Geez, it's the middle of the afternoon. We're at maximum temperature. Where did the clouds go? Why did they disappear? They disappeared because that convergence was gone. Gone. And what had happened is that southerly sea breeze, the stronger sea breeze from the Atlantic Ocean, is now coming across Long Island. And what I found very, very interesting, as that southerly sea breeze was coming across Long Island, our sea breeze up on the Connecticut shoreline got weaker. And as it got weaker, the wind veered. So where we had been sailing most of the day in a 200, 210 wind at 9, 10, 11, 12 knots, all of a sudden the wind is now 220, 230. We're down to 7 or 8 knots. And everybody's on the boat going, well, sea breeze is dying. It's ending for the day. We're all done. But I just sat there amazed that the clouds were gone. And I'm looking over on the other side of Long Island Sound, and now I'm starting to see some sheep in the paddock. I'm starting to see a little white water on the south side of Long Island Sound. And it's like, wow, look at that. And lo and behold, that stronger southerly worked its way right across the sound. And by 5:30, 6 o'clock in the evening, we're now into a 180 wind at 15, 16, 17 knots. Now, does that happen all the time? No. But all the time that those cumulus clouds disappear, that southerly is making its way across. It does not always make its way across to the Connecticut side, but it will make its way across to the north side of Long Island. So it's interesting. A lot of the yacht clubs do their racing in the evening during the summertime. And especially on the north side of Long Island, where the sea breeze is so meager in the middle of the afternoon or early afternoon, the best racing is around 6 o'clock in the evening when that southerly comes across. So once again, you watch those clouds and it'll give you an indication of the southerlies coming in. And just real briefly, in the Gulf of St. Tropez, quite frequently you'll have a northeast or east weak sea breeze during the morning and early afternoon. But down on the south shore of France, south of the Gulf of St. Tropez, there's a southerly sea breeze going. And you'll see those cumulus clouds form on that spit of land south of the Gulf of St. Tropez. When those cumulus clouds disappear at 3 or 4 o'clock in the afternoon, that's the indicator that the southerly is now coming in. And I'm sure there's other locations where this happens as well. But I found this particularly interesting. So any questions about that type of sea breeze change? And I've got about 5 minutes left. Quickly, I'm going to go through the winds and clouds that I saw on Weymouth during the Olympics down there. And one of the first things that I noticed when I got there into Weymouth was that band of clouds came off of Portlandville up into Weymouth Harbor, right across the race course. And once again, you know, it's not a huge cloud feature, but it's a relatively persistent cloud feature. And I saw it the first day I was there. I saw it the next day I was there. And I saw it the third day I was there. And they were all sea breeze days. So it's like, okay, one, I know it's forming over the higher terrain of Portlandville, but has to be a convergence band. And not only that, I noticed that it moved. Sometimes it swung up into the harbor. Sometimes it swung down out of the harbor. And there were always wind shifts associated with that. The other thing that I found particularly interesting, the winds were lighter underneath the clouds. And I was spending a lot of time working with Robert Scheid over there, the Brazilian sailor. And we were always discussing there was a slight wind shift on each side of the clouds. But the most important thing was to minimize our time underneath that cloud area, because the wind speeds were between 1 and 2 knots less underneath that cloud line. And the other thing was, and if we were together, I'd ask people to raise hands, you don't want to tack underneath the clouds either. There's the shift there, but you don't tack in the light winds underneath the clouds. You tack in the clear skies on either the north or the south side of the cloud band. The other thing that I noticed was that cloud band, if the south-southwest sea breeze was freshening, the cloud band had a tendency to rotate up into the harbor and more towards the mainland, so that we could figure a building left shift was coming into the harbor. If that cloud band rotated to the right, looking upwind, towards the left, looking upwind, more towards the English Channel, I knew that the breeze coming over Chesapeake Beach was becoming more dominant, a little bit stronger, and it also had a tendency to rotate right. So once again, this was another location where you just watch the clouds. They would give you an indicator on how the shifts were coming and how the pressure was changing. And as far as I know, Paul, I think I just used up all my time, but I'm more than willing to take any questions.
Well, I didn't stop you because it was so fascinating. Thank you very much for that. Shall I stop the slide presentation? And then have we got any questions? Any questions from anybody? I mean, that was fascinating. I hadn't appreciated how much information you could get from clouds on sea breezes like that, and particularly over islands or strips of land. Is it similar in the Solent?
Oh, sure. It's very similar in the Solent. And you would see the clouds pop up over the Isle of Wight, and then you'd see them disappear again. And that was usually an indicator that the sea breeze was freshening. And not only that, it was spreading. Quite frequently, you have a slightly different sea breeze in the East Solent versus West Solent. But when the cloud over the Isle of Wight disappeared, that sea breeze was the sea breeze was actually pushing into the East Solent then as well. So yeah, there was a similar type of thing there as well.
That's great. Thank you. Well, look, thank you very much. We've completely run out of time now, Ken. So thank you very much for that. Thank you very much for your time and joining us from the States. It's one of the great advantages of doing webinars that you can get people from any part of the world to join them. So thank you very much for that. Great insight, and leaves us with something to think about, and probably watch the clouds with greater interest and a little bit more knowledge. So thank you very much for that.
You're very welcome. Have a great day, everybody.
Thank you. Right, moving on. Our fourth and final speaker is Conall Morrison, who is a clipper race skipper, and he will be talking about, I think, weather for the Circumnavigator. Conall started sailing professionally in 2007, initially in Plymouth under the Asto umbrella. In 2014, he joined the clipper race as a training skipper and went on to lead a crew of 22 around the world for the 2017 to 18 clipper. He was awarded a special prize after the Sidney-Hobart race for coming to the aid of a man overboard from another vessel. And he is currently working as a sailing instructor and doing yacht deliveries, as well as supporting mental health related work on the Kinsale based Catch Illan. So over to you, Conall.
Hi, thank you, Paul. I'm coming to you here from Derry in Northern Ireland, and can you hear me all right?
Yes, I can hear you perfectly.
Yeah,
the picture's not brilliant, but the sign's fine.
Okay, great, fantastic. And then, I'm just delighted, honored to be asked to do this. So I have to say thank you to the Society, and thank you to Andrew Eccleston for the invite. He's a friend from that I met in Plymouth. And we had a few adventures together, so it was fantastic. So thanks to all the other speakers as well. I know what I have prepared for you today will, it won't be anywhere near as technical as what Ken has been talking about there. It was a great presentation, and I guess mine is a bit more of the human element, if you like. I'll get, I might not, get the whole 35 minutes, but we'll see. We'll see how I get on, with it. So thanks everybody for coming. Right. So I did the clipper race in 2017, 2018, and as Paul said there, my background was even before I started sailing professionally, I was going to be a teacher for a while. And before that, I was going to be an electronics engineer. But I always knew that, I enjoyed the sea so much. So it was fantastic to, realize the dream, really, to take on the clipper race. And, professionally race around the world. So about the race itself, I don't want to sit here and do an ad for it, but... it's the world's longest ocean race. Oh, it was when I did it, but maybe since the Volvo race might have done a longer passage. and it's regarded as one of the toughest endurance challenges. Over 40,000 miles that we did. It was amateur crew and a professional skipper. And then from about halfway around, we had a first mate. The crew were all ages. Our youngest was 21 and our oldest was 78. That we had on Hotel Planner, and all walks of life, with people coming from all sorts of different jobs, professional people. You know, we tried to create a team ethos, or the thing was about, you know, the half of the funding for the racing would come from a sponsor, and then half would come from people paying for it themselves. And a big part of the race was the marketing and media. As in each boat, you would have certain sponsored commitments, and even the crew themselves would have. I send a blog in every day, and our crew would do a vlog every day as well. It would rotate crew members. So there we are: 8 legs, 5 ocean crossings, 6 continents. Typically 3 to 4 weeks at sea, and then maybe a week or 2 at shore. But sometimes that was shorter. Some legs had a number of races, so we had 13 races in all. The yacht, so it's a nice picture of a good soak in there, and with a few reefs in. So the 75 foot long, 35 tons, draft of 3 meters, air draft of 29 meters, 24 berths, although they weren't all usable, with our equipment and stores in them, and 11 sails. So not not quite your Formula One, not all the boats were the same, and all the equipment was provided by Clipper. So it was quite, we're very equal that way. So on our boat, we had 64 crew, 10 went around the world, and the other 54 did 1 or more legs, and we had 18 nationalities, which is quite a challenge, quite a people challenge. And, on this slide now, so we did a lot of the training in the Solent, so that's me with the needles behind me, and some cumulus, I think, on the top right. On top left, that's myself and David Hartshorn with our pictures. That was Portsmouth Guildhall, where we met the crew. So we'd stand on stage and read out a list of names. We didn't really know who we were going to get. Below that, we have skippers doing training with the life jackets and ocean safety. It doesn't look very exciting. And then on crew allocation day, that's my parents and a lot of the team that came. So not everyone could come to that, but we have a good strong team there on the day we were allocated. So on our allocation day, I stood up and spoke to the crew about, what kind of team are we going to be? The question they ask is, are we going to win? What are we going to do? What's our strategy? And maybe it was the wrong strategy for me, but I said, no, I don't think we're going to win. Which isn't really how you go about winning a race, but I always wanted to be, prioritize safety and having fun. So safe, fun, and fast is kind of what we were aiming for. And we achieved the first 2, I think, quite well, and sometimes fast. So we had our day in a room, and then we had a weekend where we went camping and did a few, I think we went kayaking as a kind of team building event. And we came up with, like a team charter, but rather than make it legalistic, my background in sail training and working with groups of kids, I guess you could call it, personal development on the water. This is kind of what we would have used with groups of kids, where we come up with some rules and games and goals and things we want and things we don't want. And one of the team, she came out with something brilliant on our very first day. what kind of team we're going to be. And she said, what about the team that has the most fun, the team that everyone else wants to be in? So I think we really did achieve that. And it was tough, it was a challenge, but we made sure we had fun along the way. So here we are, we had one of our crew, Adam, was a personal trainer and very much into rugby. So during a break in the training at Anchor here, we are doing some deck yoga. And those life jackets can be bad for your back, so that was great fun. And he even did yoga in port for the other boats. So we had quite a bit of fun with that. And the TV cruise. And this is the food. So Roseanne was in charge of the food, and we have, I forget this lady's name, and Greg there, but we've organized it into like squares for each day. So we're talking about 1.5 tons of food, 40 of these dry bags for leg one. So it's quite a big undertaking. What we did as well is before we left, we kind of compartmentalized all the jobs. So, sail repair, medical, victualling, safety, things like that. So every kind of round the world crew member, I tried to give a job or to be in charge of something. We had a team coordinator and we had a media person. And this was the delivery up to the race start in Liverpool. And you can see the happy team there, and that was they baked the birthday cake for Greg, so that was great. We kind of setting the scene for how we wanted to do it. And there was always a bit of banter and stuff like that. And no one was exempt. So I got a bit of stick here we turned one of the official media things into this. Hello, Hotel Planet reception here on the radio. And so looking at the first leg, that was 6,200 miles. It took us 32 days. So it's a long way from Liverpool to Punta del Este in Uruguay on the River Plate. And the weather we had a weather router, and his name was Simon Rowell. I put a link to his stuff at the end because I've used a couple of slides from him. And he called this a club sandwich of a leg, where we have, the typical North Atlantic weather, and then we have with the lows, and then we have the northeast trades, the doldrums, the southeast trades, and south of the equator there we can we have in the summer season those winds will bend to the right, so it's southerly winds leaving slightly southwest trades as we come out of there. So I'll just move on to the next slide. This is one of the things Simon did for us, was streamlined plots rather than in the tropics. He said these were better than we have a very shallow pressure gradient. These were great for showing us winds, and you can even see tropical storm formation in this one, and to be wary of hurricanes. And as we move from east to west, you can see that there's something there that is quite more developed. We actually had a crew member. Well, we had a hurricane, a tropical storm developing along our path, and we didn't get close to it, but it did go on to the Caribbean and Florida, and one of our crew had a house in Florida. So I asked Simon for a bit more information, and he gave us very good detailed information as to when the hurricane hit landfall. So Randy was messaging his wife from the boat, and she said, "Oh no, don't worry, the house is fine, it's all good." And Randy had lots of information, maybe a little bit otherwise. And then when he arrived in Uruguay, she told him, "Yeah, no, it's bad news." But it was a holiday house, luckily, so not their permanent residence. So that's the threat of hurricanes for a weather presentation somewhere else. And then we didn't experience the hurricanes, but we did experience the flying fish. And that's Seamus with the flying fish, and he did just leg one. He was delighted to see the albatrosses, to see flying fish and the whales, and great fun as a crew member. Oh yeah, always trimming. Maybe this is why we weren't the fastest. But yeah, maybe I'll move on. Yeah, in Uruguay they put up a great reception for us. I think they sponsored a boat, and they had a whitbread race visit them in the early 90s, I think. Write down the date. 93. They had a whitbread race visit in 93. So the yacht club there had photos of that on the wall. So part of arriving there made me think about, God, where this is like a proper racing that we're doing, proper ocean crossing. Leg 2 took us from Uruguay to Cape Town, and great circle route, A to B. This red line is our actual route that we took. I think we've a few jibes and spinnaker hoists and gone off track a little bit. So yeah, I feel that this leg, we kind of did go off track a bit. We may have finished at the back of the pack anyway. And one of the things was that we were chased by a front. I don't think I have a slide of the weather for that, but to get the weather router or race meteorologist tell you, oh, there's a front coming, it's going to be 40 knots, maybe 45 knots, gust to 50, 55 knots, watch out for the clouds, this and that. And our weather being mostly quite mild on leg 1, I wasn't quite ready for, I just played it too safe, for the weather here. So we reefed a bit early, and I made the mistake of not getting enough sleep, in that I thought this front was chasing us and I needed to be there when it happened. But it was very gradual, and if I had advice for myself again, it would be, get some sleep, trust your crew, know your limits and the boat's limits and the crew's limits. But the boat, she was perfectly capable within her limits, and we probably could have pushed a good bit harder than we did. Later in the leg, we had a bit of a broach and we were knocked down. But we turned that into a learning point. We really just weren't looking around us. We weren't looking at the clouds. We should have had the radar on. And even, a long time later, someone said to me, why didn't we just ease the spinnaker sheet? And, that would have made it so much easier. But, whereas I thought I'd trained this into people, it's very easy to forget when the day-to-day is so easy, So maybe reminding of the training is a good thing to be doing. Yeah, I think the next couple of slides is just, that's the front that chased us. I think this is still for video, and that's, that's the whole watch there, putting away the number 1 Yankee is quite a job to fold that up on deck. We didn't have any furling, so very manual hanking on sails for changes between head sails. Yeah, and that's just a little bit of white water there. And there's the boat there. I think the top one was from training, but it's just a look at our storm jib, staysail and mainsail with probably 2 reefs. Bottom right, just giving you an idea of the heel on the boat, and the bottom left is the same. I think this was actually finally coming into Liverpool. Probably had a bit more media on board, or better photos from that. Yeah, and this is leg 2 on the race. So that's me, happy crew, probably wet outside. And there they are, probably, just off watch, maybe after breakfast or something in the saloon. And then we have Nick with a loaf of bread. So we had to bake our own bread, being at sea for so long. And it became a great source of pride for people to do a good job of that, to do, make good meals and do good bread. So Nick's delighted with himself there. And yes, this is our final run into Cape Town. So I said that we had, a kind of a learning from overdoing things. were being a bit too nervous about sail changes, and then we broached the spinnaker, but we kind of got over that before the end of the race, and I'm glad that we kind of said, well, we can finish last in here, or we can get this place that's up for grabs. So we did a good overnight, and I kind of got more comfortable sailing the boat again, which was brilliant for everybody. And that's Table Mountain, maybe off to the right. It's in there somewhere. Yeah. Leg 3 took us from Cape Town to Fremantle, Western Australia, and I think this was the breaking or the making leg. You know, there was a lot happened here. Kind of dipping into the Southern Ocean, although we had a southern limit of the course, and it must have been about 40, 47 degrees or so. Sorry, no, yeah, it would have been about, yeah, maybe 44 degrees, sorry, south. Yeah, so before the leg, we were worried about, this, the Gullis Bank here, comes maybe 160 miles offshore, and we have the currents meeting, the Gullis Current, Benguela Current going up the South African coast. And, like when you come out of any harbour, whatever, if you've currents coming from different directions or a river, wind over the current, you get these shallow water, you get steep waves. And we had a lot of wind, and, we had a disaster really, when we left on the first night. One of the boats ran aground, and she was lost. She ended up staying there, and she was, in the end, she was cut up because it was a nature reserve. But it was quite an operation getting the crew off while, the rest of the boats raced on, and it sounded almost unbelievable on our boat that happened as we were heading offshore. And it was a shift in the wind that maybe they weren't watching or keeping an eye on, and then they weren't ready to jibe in time, and so for me, I noticed boats ahead of us, and nav lights where you'd see the stern of the boat. Instead of just carrying on in front of us, it was moving from left to right, and then another one went, and we're like, okay, what's going on? Why has this happened? And I looked at the chart plotter and could see it was very obvious that there was a wind shift, and we were all going towards the shore. So it was a real shame. These guys lost the boat on greenings. We then had our own, maybe the next day or the day after. It was very windy. We were down to 3 reefs in a staysail upwind. And, we could tell we were a bit slower than other boats. So this is our track. And we actually tried to tack north at one stage, but it was so bad. So we had to continue on the south course, really not making much. Yeah, but when the wind was up, yeah, it was bumpy. So we put the storm jib back up, and I later learned that other boats were sailing with their Yankee 3. So we were being very conservative, but we put the storm jib up and we were off like a train. But then Greg, one of our crew members, slipped down below and knocked himself unconscious and broke his arm, and that was really tragic. People were there straight away. Mary, our medic nurse, was looking after him, and then we had lucky to have Otto, who was a surgeon on board as well. And after not too long, Greg just looked at, Otto looked at Greg and said, "Oh, he's just got concussion. It's okay." But anyway, we decided we'd go back to shore and get Greg looked at properly, because he was very confused and we really wanted him to get good treatment. So we went back to Port Elizabeth, and when we got to Port Elizabeth, some of the crew from Greenings who had lost their boat were there to meet us, and they came on board and did the leg with us. So we'd gone from a crew of about 16 to a crew of 22, and that was brilliant because they were, yeah, sorry, that's Greg, just bandaged up, and this is Port Elizabeth as he got off. I think the next one is the whole crew at the end. Yeah, so this is our crew at the end, and the people who came with us were they were what we needed. They gave us a little edge in that, they'd lost their boat, they'd lost everything, and then we'd offered them, taking the trip with us, and they were just delighted. So we found our feet in that leg. We got a very good spinnaker run that allowed us to catch up with the fleet. So we were downwind and some of them were upwind in the same weather system. It was really unbelievable. So we actually could see them by the time we finished, even though we'd taken 2 days out to go north and change crews. I mean, a lot of luck with the weather, but we did push the boat and made it. So it was fantastic. I think we didn't finish last. We got a place because we got a couple of hours of redress, I think. So we got one place back. But a great team, great effort. We were also the fastest for the ocean sprint of this leg. So we set, before the leg starts, Clipper will set a little area that's a sprint just to allow us to pick up a few more points and have a gate that there'll be extra points for that will be slightly off the run line, and then they have a sprint section which might be 200 miles long or something. So we did really well on that. I think we won that, so we made a bit of a meal out of our success. And I got Mark Light, the race director, to present us with a trophy, present me with the trophy for the ocean sprint, which they don't normally do. And then we had a bit of fun. And the trophy was, in fact, our trophy from on board, just for creating a bit of competition on board. So, yeah, we had great fun with that. And yeah, so this is Simon Spears, who tragically lost his life. He was on another vessel. He was on Great Britain. So he was washed overboard during a sail change. And he was still tethered to the boat, but the tether came undone. And, I wasn't there, so we can't talk about the full details. But, yeah, very tragic. And it just, it makes you think that, we need to be careful with our procedures and processes, and it could happen to anyone. We are doing something dangerous here. But yeah, great kind of that he went doing something he really enjoyed. Tragic then that he probably had a few more years. Yeah. And in a way it affected the safety culture, which was good. I think I've skipped around a bit so from Fremantle, here we are in Sydney. I had time for a break with some family. So my sister's there with the lovely Smiles, the nephew, and then some friends as we're taking the boat under Sidney-Hobart Bridge. Yeah, and so my family had booked somewhere nearby the yacht club. So we left in the Yacht Club of Australia, the Cruising Yacht Club of Australia, and we had a few jobs in town, but we still were able to enjoy ourselves there, have a little break. There was lots of getting ready for the Sidney-Hobart race. It was a very prestigious race, and it was mad to be out there in the start line. I think there was 3 start lines and so many boats. The story then is, of course, that that's our course there. So not long after the start, we had we're still, we had a terrible start, and I was sort of getting used to being at the back of the fleet, and I saw a yacht going the wrong direction without a spinnaker up. It's like they had a spinnaker a few minutes ago. But, I wonder, are they okay? And I knew the skipper. So I called them on the radio, and the response was, are you guys okay? And the response was, oh, we've had a man overboard, but everything seems to be okay, which, wouldn't be what you'd expect to hear. So I thought we'd go over and we'd look. And then maybe, recent things playing on my mind with the loss of Simon there. Just like, we're in a position to help here. Let's actually help. Let's not go for luck. Let's go and do our bit. So we pride ourselves on being able to do the maneuver of picking up a man overboard. We practiced hundreds of times. So we'd lower someone on a halyard, and they'd go in with another halyard and a strop and a hook, and they could hook onto the, we would use a dummy to practice on, but they'd hook into the other person, and then both people could be brought up, wound up onto the deck on halyards. So we just executed that as we did, and we got the man out of the water. I mean, when we got on scene, the boat that he'd fallen from had done a few circles, but they'd missed him and they looked a bit unready. So I thought, but what if we don't do it? We have to do it. We're here. This is an emergency. So we got him out of the water and then had a chat, and then they wanted him back. So we actually blew up our little dinghy and put him into it and towed him behind us. And then the other crew picked him out of the water. And we thought, wow, that was amazing. We got that done, after the race start. And so we're like, let's get settled down now. Let's get sailing and enjoy our dinner. And I think Sir Robin Knox Johnson was the boat in front of us. So it was like, there's the boss. He's in he's in the older boat, Clipper 68. We can't let him beat us. So we followed him, I think, all the way down to where we jagged, halfway down the course. Maybe another day. And then we, carried on with the race. We had great fun. But just at the very end, just coming in, the wind completely died. And it allowed us to kind of catch up with the other boats. We could see them in front of us. So we're doing our best to make the wind shifts and everything. And then the wind falls in. So we're all, rushing up this river, the Derwent River. And then someone says to me, we can get our time back. We can get, so the boat that's leading, they're not finished yet. And I couldn't believe it, that we were going to get the win or a placing, we'd get on the podium because we'd get 2 hours back for helping. So that was fantastic, and it was just a great feeling to finish the race and be part of it at all. So going into Hobart, then it was Boxing Day we started, so we were there for the new year. But maybe this photo's from then. But over to the right of your picture, on the pier here, they had like a Taste of Tasmania food festival, and it was Wendy explained to me that if you wanted, you could do like a little flyby on the pier there, and whatever was in my mind, I just thought, we'll do that, and we got a big clap, a big standing ovation as we went past. So I think they'd heard about what we did, and it was really amazing. So yeah, really wonderful. So we got the race win, and we went on stage, and they gave me this plaque was for the most meritorious performance as judged by the race committee. So it really was fantastic, a fantastic Sidney-Hobart experience. And if I'm right, the race fleet hasn't been back there, the Clipper 70, so I'm still the current fleet holder of the Sidney-Hobart yacht race. So you can see our crew here, lots of sunny, sunburned faces. We've got Karsten was oil and gas. We have Greg was a farmer from New Zealand. Graham was pilot. With a teacher. A few people working in London. Nurse. Ryan. We have our first mate here, Anna, who's German, and she just joined the boat. So she must have thought we were excellent racers after just winning the first race. Oh yeah, and all the way to the left is Adrian, and he was our rescue swimmer, and he later became a watch leader on the boat. So I think for some reason my 2 youngest crew became the watch leaders as time went on. Maybe because they wanted to sort of learn more the way I was doing things, or they liked that, or maybe because I'd done lots of kind of youth work type stuff before. But everybody in the boat wanted to work for them. They wanted to do a good job, and they held the watch leaders in high regard. So I really liked that. It was like people wanted to do a good job for them. Yeah. So we'll carry on. Yeah, and that's Roseanne. So Adrian was one watch leader, and Roseanne was the other. She hadn't sailed before. before coming on clippers. So it was a real fantastic achievement for her to get to be watch leader. You know, she knew all of our evolutions, how we'd run things, how through the steps of things, but we'd have better. She didn't really like to take the helm much. It was the older men that would take the helm, partly because they're stronger, but it's just the kind of stuff that they liked to and they gravitated to mostly. But yeah. So this is Roseanne, one of our youngest crew, and Per from Sweden is one of our oldest crew. He didn't do the whole race, but yeah, he was very strong, and he was basically just spinning Roseanne's arms for this photograph. And yeah, Roseanne, you know, appeared a lot in our kind of media stuff and a lot with, you know, Derry, which is my own home port as well. So Roseanne's from very close to me as well. So that was her little moment of fame. Sorry, I'm just watching the time. I don't want to overdo here. Yeah, up to China, light winds on this leg. I'd say through the Solomon Sea. We motored some of this, but that was within the race rules. We had a window where we could motor. It just had to take, you know, you had to take an average of 5 knots through your motoring. So if you did it quicker, you just waited at the end and then carried on your race. Very light winds going north, and then when we came into the trades, we were able to get across to Hainan, this island here on your left, and then after that we came around to Taiwan and up to Qingdao, and there's 10 million people in Qingdao, and it's only a small Chinese city, so they put on a fantastic reception for us. Oh, before that, this is Hainan. We finally started ripping our spinnakers. We were very good at looking after them, but on the way to Hainan, I think we'd ripped the light one. I think we'd ripped the lightest one and the heaviest one. So Greg has his arm around Mary here, because yeah, and Mary's still smiling, which is amazing after having to, you know, sew a tennis court back together. And then this is Sarah at the sewing machine as well. I think the left picture, the bottom left, is just me posing beside a picture of myself. You know, when you're famous or you're almost famous, you have to enjoy it. Yes, and this is arrival into Qingdao. Our man here, God, his name just completely escapes me. He was he worked in finance and trade, and then he just loved China so much. He worked in Hong Kong, and he's a New Yorker. When he went back to New York, he taught Chinese. So he taught us a little bit of Chinese on the way up. And so when I got on the stage, he'd written a little speech for me, and he'd done it in Chinese too. So he was able to just sort of shoo away the translator, and he made a big name for himself. And he would talk to everybody that we met in China, and he'd go into the, you know, the food places and just have a good long chat with them all. So yeah, the strapline of hotel planner that we had on our banners was bringing people together. So we didn't choose that, but you know, that was, I think it was very much an ethos of how we were. And I think you have Sir Robin here in the background, having a little wry smile. Yeah, this is St. Patrick's Day in China, and it's also Sir Robin's birthday, and there was also a rugby match. So we enjoyed ourselves there. Yeah, and then across the Pacific. Across the Pacific was it was amazing. It was, to me, this was my Everest. It was just awesome. You know, we left China in very light winds. It took us 4 weeks to get to Seattle. But we left in very light winds, and I thought, you know, they might have us motor, or they might shorten the race, or just try and get us down to, you know, somewhere near Japan before we got going. But it was really good. One of the other skippers, you know, said to me the race before, he's like, "Oh, we got away from you there because we, you know, the peeler spinnakers. What they did was they changed they had a spinnaker up, and they flew a second spinnaker before dropping the first one, whereas we had taken it down and then got our lines ready and hoisted again. He said, if you'd have done that, you would have stayed close to us there. So it gave me a little bit of encouragement. And then in the light winds at the start of this leg, we practiced, and it just gave us, our crew, a little bit of, wow, we can do this, we can race, we can do better, and it gave us something to work on. We also had, I guess, a few more younger crew members, or just crew members that were really keen to push it, and a lot of fun. And to me, that was another mix of why we did better in this leg. And we also had, before we left, Greg had said to me, let's have a little a thing maybe where we can have a little team together to look at the weather, and maybe then we can make better decisions. And so we did. I'll just go on around China, and there we have, let's meet at the nav station, and our time zero is what we used here. Am I running on a bit there, Paul?
You are slightly. If you could,
yeah,
try and wind up in a couple of minutes.
That's okay. Yeah, I'll just do a quick one. I know I'm not very technical on weather here, but that was the nav station and our time zero software, which had our polars and could tell us, the right places to go. And then this is the big low pressure that came up during the race, and you can see there was a storm force there. And so we had our force 10, and we had that for a long time. So as we crossed the international date line, so it did make those big waves, the phenomenal waves. We surfed down the 14-meter waves, and it was something else. It was hard, it was cold, but by that stage, we knew what we were doing, and the boat was fast. So that's us coming into the Pacific. And we're very happy. I think we finished fourth in that race. I do have more going on, and maybe I'll just slip on to the very end. We did the Panama Canal, and we sailed back into Derry, and to me that was something fantastic. We met the mayor, and that was my hometown. And this is my mother put together a little day of celebration for the team up at Ireland's most northerly point, and that was fantastic. And this is the whole team, the whole Clipper race that was there in the Guildhall in Derry. So it was fantastic to sail into my hometown too. So thank you to everybody that invited me. Thank you for listening, and thank you to Simon as well for the help, and that's his website, the help with the weather related stuff. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for that, Conall. And let me just check if anybody's got any questions. Could I ask a question about the information you got from Simon, the weather routing? Was that for all the fleet?
Yeah. So it was a rule that, yes, Simon gave us the weather. He gave it. I think we got update once a day, and it was for the whole fleet. So the big gribs, there would be like a long-term grib that wasn't good resolution, and there'd be a resolution grib that was maybe 5 days for our area, satellite images, and those streamlined plots, and then currents as well. I didn't even mention the currents in Sidney-Hobart race, but it was really cool to sail where they made Finding Nemo, wasn't it? The East Australian current, if I'm right. Yeah.
Great. Well, look, thank you very much for that. We've almost run out of time, so I'm afraid I'm going to have to call an end to your talk and questions. But thank you very much for joining us from Derry for that. That was excellent. Thanks very much, Conall, and good luck with your next adventure.
Thank you.
So really it just falls to me to sum up the day, and we've heard from 4 speakers, very different talks, and all of them fascinating, with a large amount of information. with some of the speakers, too much detailed information to be able to take in. As I mentioned, this is going to be available on the RYN YouTube channel, so you will be able to find it there, hopefully in less than a week. But so have a look if there's something you want to watch again. But so just thank all the speakers, and I'd now like to call on Andrew Eccleston to just say a few words on behalf of the Royal Meteorological Society.
Yes, thank you very much, Paul, and thanks for chairing this. And yes, on behalf of the Royal Meteorological Society, I'd like to say thank you to all the speakers and all the people who've attended. And it's been great that the Royal Institute of Navigation and the Royal Meteorological Society, together with the support of the Royal Yachting Association as well, have been able to pull off another really, really great, very informative event. So 4 really knowledgeable speakers who offer so many different insights into weather and sailing. So thanks to everyone, and hopefully next year we'll actually be able to do this in person, as we have done so many times in the past. So thank you very much.
Indeed, thank you for that, Andrew. And just to confirm that the event, the proper weather and sailing event, will be held at the RNLI headquarters in Poole on the 1st of October next year. So look forward to seeing you then. There are a sort of party political broadcast on behalf of RYN. We do have a few more events over the winter. We've got 4 talks, some very interesting speakers. I won't go through them all over the winter. Information on all of the talks will be on the RYN website. And the next event that we are running is going to be a hybrid. It's going to be our again biennial electronic navigation conference, which we are holding on the 21st of January next year at the Royal Yacht Squadron. It's going to be a hybrid event, so if you'd like to go to the squadron, please join us there, or you can watch it online as well. So I'm sure that's going to be a wonderful event. So please check the information again on the RYN website. So just finally, before I say goodbye to everybody, thank you very much to all the speakers again for the time and effort and the fascinating talks. Great information and something for all of us to take away. I'm certainly going to look much more closely at the clouds, especially if I think there's a convergence happening. That was something I perhaps didn't know previously, and I should have known. So thank you to all our speakers, but most of all, thank you to all of you for logging in and watching this today. We still have quite a number, 68 still watching. We started off with over 100 and nearly 140, so we've had a very, very good audience today. So thank you all, and I look forward to seeing you again at some point in the future. So thank you and goodbye.